Welcome, crew, guys, gals, ghouls, and otherworldly beings. Let's climb aboard the mothership, secure our tinfoil hats, buckle down tight, and hold on loosely as we soar over the rocky tops of the La Platas on a rocky mountain high, get sucked into the vortex of the Four Corners, and settle down snugly at mile marker 420 in colorful Colorado. I'm your ghostess, TessaTNT, broadcasting from the Mile High Clubhouse tonight. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to you, and welcome to We Are Paradox Media's Late Night in the Rockies. It is an honor, a pleasure, and a privilege to have you here hanging out with me tonight. I hope all is well in your neck of the woods and you're somehow avoiding all the craziness out there in the world. If you want to listen in your free time, whether you're working it, or working out, you can listen to me on Spreaker.com and wherever else you listen to your broadcasts and podcasts. And if you don't mind, mosey on over to We Are Paradox Media on YouTube. Subscribe, like any video that you've listened to or watched, and give that bell a little tickle so that way next time a show is posted, you'll be made known that it's there and you can listen to it with your hearing ears. Alright, so tonight it is story time with me, TessaTNT. And I left the tab open so long it has expired. That is weird. It must be a new thing with the library, so let me open that up real quick once more. Well, it appears that the book we have been reading from the library online is refusing to display itself. I don't know what the issue is, so luckily, we have two other books that we checked out from the library. The book we're going to be reading is Scary Stories. This book is illustrated by Moser. The introduction is by Peter Glassman. Tingle down your spine, the small hairs at the back of your neck rising. Goosebumps along your arms. These are the signs of a truly scary story. Fear is one of the most primal emotions. Like most animals, human beings are equipped with a keen sense of fear to protect us from danger and predators. With our highly developed sense of curiosity and imagination, human beings are particularly susceptible to fear of the unknown. This is why our greatest fears are often sparked by the unseen. A catch at the window in the dark, a cry ringing out from the shadows, things that go bump in the night. Yet, oddly enough, and unlike our four-footed cousins, most people find a perverse pleasure in being scared or by being kept in suspense and anxiety over a story's outcome. Perhaps we find some satisfaction in facing our fears and standing up to them, or perhaps it is a cathartic experience for us to survive, if only secondhand, the things that haunt our nightmares. One thing is for certain, since people first started telling stories around a roaring fire, we have told stories of suspense and terror. And the popularity of frightening stories has never waned. Every culture around the world has myths and legends filled with cautionary warnings about the dangers of tempting the fates or trying to outwit destiny, about the terrible doings of ghosts and other terrifying creatures, and about the dire consequences of tampering and forbidden magic. How do you know if magic is good or forbidden? Is it primarily because it is magic? In the 14th century, almost 2 centuries before the invention of the printing press, Italian author Dante Alighieri titillated readers with his descriptions of the torments of hell with his Inferno. The stages of 16th century England were filled with plays featuring terrifying and supernatural acts and creatures, including Shakespeare's Macbeth and Hamlet. In 1776, the very year the United States declared its independence from Britain, a Japanese scholar named Yuneda Akinari published a collection of stories drawn from myths that includes a number of horrifying tales. Tales of horror and fright truly come into their own in the 19th century with the publication of Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. This was in Britain in 1818. The Legend of Sleepy Hollow by Washington Irving, United States, 1820. The Hunchback of Notre Dame by Victor Hugo, France, 1831. And Nursery and Household Tales, Kinder und Hausmärchen by Jacob and Wilhelm Grimm, Germany, 1832. Originally, the Grimm brothers wrote their stories for adults and included such scary fare as a Cinderella in which her wicked stepsister's eyes are pecked out by doves, and a Snow White in which the evil queen is punished by being made to dance in red-hot iron shoes. Only later were these adapted for children. Then, of course, there are the many classic tales of terror written from 1833 to 1849 by American author Edgar Allan Poe, whom many deem to be the father of the modern horror story. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, horror became a favored genre, and many of the stories from this era are still considered classics, including The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde by Robert Louis Stevenson, The Island of Dr. Moreau by H.G. Wells, Dracula by Bram Stoker, The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde, The Monkey's Paw by W. W. Jacobs, Those Stories of an Antiquary by M. R. James, and The Rats in the Walls by H. P. Lovecraft. Even authors who earned acclaim primarily as writers of children's stories or tales of drama and adventure also wrote some wonderful scary stories that were published in various magazines and newspapers of the day. Among these were Louisa May Alcott, E. Nisbet, Rudyard Kipling, O. Henry, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, Henry James, and Charles Dickens. Today, authors and their readers continue to be entranced by stories that arouse and excite our sense of fear. From Truman Capote to Stephen King, from Roald Dahl to Joyce Carol Oates to Ray Bradbury, few authors seem able to resist the urge to conjure up a good scare. Nor do they lack for readers willing and eager to be frightened. In this collection, we have brought together 20 very different authors, some renowned for their tales of terror and the supernatural, others best known for writing in other genres. Some are classics that have titillated and thrilled millions of readers around the world, while others are little-known gems that only devotees of horror and ghost stories are likely to have come across before. Few in America can get through high school without encountering Edgar Allan Poe's gruesome short story, The Telltale Heart, or Washington Irving's at turns comical and horrific The Legend of Sleepy Hollow. But did you know that Britain's Prime Minister, Sir Winston Churchill, penned a chilling tale called Man Overboard, Or that O. Henry, famous for such hilarious and ironic short stories as The Ransom of Red Chief and The Gift of the Magi, could create a tale as haunting as The Furnished Room? Roald Dahl is familiar to most as the author of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, but he's also a master of the macabre, as Genesis and Catastrophe attests. Who doesn't know Stephen King? He is the famous best-selling author of numerous modern classics of horror, such as Salem's Lot, The Shining, and It. Though his terrifying novels are the most well-known, he is also a brilliant short story writer, as you'll learn in Here There Be Tygers. When you hear the name H.G. Wells, his classics of science fiction, War of the Worlds, and The Time Machine, leap to mind, while mention Ray Bradbury, and one automatically thinks of The Martian Chronicles and Fahrenheit 451. But the fear and tension in those books is nothing compared to the chills you'll find in Wells' The Magic Shop and Bradbury's The Man Upstairs. E. Nesbit was a beloved child's writer. Among her endearing stories of adventure and magic are The Railway Children and The Story of the Treasure Seekers. Yet she also had a darker side, which is on display in her eerie story, John Carrington's Wedding. Truman Capote rose to international fame with In Cold Blood and Breakfast at Tiffany's, but he penned a marvelously eerie and creepy tale in Miriam. As we contemplated an illustrator for this collection, we naturally thought of Barry Moser. His haunting and brilliant engravings for Frankenstein, 1984, and his spine-tingling watercolors for Tales of Edgar Allan Poe in 1991 are among the most striking and memorable illustrations ever created for these classic works of horror. Moser's genius lies in his ability to capture a story in a single moment, bringing it vividly to life and so convey the emotional impact of the author's words through his art. In the 20 heart-stopping, eerie, and mesmerizing engravings he has created for this book, Moser has crafted a suite of images that portrays the range of moods, settings, and emotions that reflect the diversity of the wonderful talents collected here. From the poignant picture in the cemetery for John Carrington's Wedding to the horrifying image of the hand dripping blood for Kittens. For the searing eyes that stare out from the young girl's face in the picture of Miriam, to the harrowing visage of the headless horseman for the legend of Sleepy Hollow. From the creepy image of the knife held over the victim and to tell the telltale heart, to the terrifying view of the attacking cat, claws fully extended for the squaw. Moser flawlessly captures the frights that spring from these fabulous authors' words. So, still your nerves, steady your pulse, curl up someplace brightly lit, or if you're truly brave, read these pages by candle's flickering light. And prepare to be scared as you've rarely been scared before by entering into the brilliantly horrifying worlds of these 20 great tales of horror. Kittens by Dean Koontz. The cool green waters slipped along the steam bed, bubbling around smooth brown stones, reflecting the melancholy willows that lined the bank. Marnie sat on the grass, tossing stones into a deep pool, watching the ripples spread in ever-winding circles and lap at the muddy banks. She was thinking about kittens. This year's kittens, not last year's. A year ago, her parents had told her that the kittens had gone to heaven. Kinky's litter had disappeared the third day after their squealing birth. Marnie's father had said God took them away to heaven to live with him. She didn't exactly doubt her father. After all, he was a religious man. He taught Sunday school every week and was an officer or something in the church whose duty it was to count collection money and mark it down in the little red book. He was always picked to give the sermon on Layman's Sunday, and every evening he read passages to them from the Bible. He had been late for the reading last night and had been spanked. Spare the rod and spoil the child, her father always said. No, she didn't actually doubt her father, for if anyone would know about God and kittens, it was he. But she continued to wonder, why, when there are hundreds upon thousands of kittens in the world, did God have to take all 4 of hers? Was God selfish? This was the first that she had thought of those kittens for some time. In the past 12 months, much had happened to make her forget. There was her first year in school, the furor of getting ready for the first day, the buying of paper, pencils, and books, and the first few weeks had been interesting, meeting Mr. Alphabet and Mr. Numbers. When school began to bore her, Christmas rushed in on polished runners and glistening eyes, the shopping, the green and yellow and red and blue lights, the Santa Claus on the corner who staggered when he walked, the candlelit church on Christmas Eve when she had had to go to the bathroom and her father had made her wait until the service was over. When things began to lose momentum again in March, her mother had given birth to twins. Marnie had been surprised at how small they were and at how slowly they seemed to grow in the following weeks. Here it was, June again. The twins were 3 months old, finally beginning to grow a great deal heavier. School was out and Christmas was an eternity away and everything was getting dull again. Therefore, when she heard her father telling her mother that Pinky was going to have another litter, she grasped at the news and wrenched every drop of excitement from it. She busied herself in the kitchen, preparing rags and cotton for the berth and a fancy box for the kittens' home when they arrived. As events ran their natural course, Pinky slunk away and had the kittens during the night in a dark corner of the barn. There was no need for sterilized rags or cotton, but the box came in handy. There were 6 in this litter, all gray with black spots that looked like ink hastily blotted. She liked the kittens and she was worried about them. What if God was watching again like last year? "What are you doing, Marnie?" She didn't have to look. She knew who was behind her. She turned anyway, out of deference, and saw her father glaring down at her, dark, irregular splotches of perspiration discoloring the underarms of his faded blue work coveralls. Dirt smeared on his chin and caked to the beard on his left cheek. "Throwing stones," she answered quietly. "At the fish?" "Oh, no, sir, just throwing stones." Do we remember who was the victim of the stone throwing? He smiled a patronizing smile. "St. Stephen," she answered. "Very good." The smile faded. "Supper's ready." She sat ramrod stiff in the old maroon easy chair, looking attentive as her father read to them from the ancient family Bible that was bound in black leather. All scuffed and with several torn pages. Her mother sat next to her father on the dark blue corduroy couch, hands folded in her lap. And isn't it wonderful what God has given us smile painted on her plain but pretty face. "Suffer the little children to come to me and forbid them not, for such is the kingdom of God." Her father closed the book with a gentle slap that seemed to leap into the stale air and hang there, holding up a thick curtain of silence. No one spoke for several minutes. Then, What chapter of what book did we just read, Marnie? St. Mark, chapter 10, she said dutifully. Fine, he said, turning to his wife, whose smile had changed to a "we've done what a Christian family should do" expression. He said, Mary, how about coffee for us and a glass of milk for Marnie? Right, said her mother, getting up and pacing into the kitchen. Her father sat there, examining the inside covers of the old holy book, running his fingers along the cracks in the yellow paper, scrutinizing the ghostly stains embedded forever in the title page, where some great uncle had accidentally spilled wine 1,000,000 billion years ago. Father, she said tentatively. He looked up from the book, not smiling, not frowning. What about the kittens? What about them? He countered. Will God take them again this year? The half-smile that had crept onto his face evaporated into the thick air of the living room. Perhaps, was all that he said. He can't, she almost sobbed. Are you saying that what God can and cannot do, young lady? No, sir. God can do anything. Yes, sir, she fidgeted in her chair, pushing herself deeper into its rough-worn folds. But why would he want my kittens again? Why always mine? I've had quite enough of this, Marnie. Now be quiet. Why mine? She persisted. He stood suddenly, crossed to the chair, and slapped her delicate face. A thin trickle of blood slipped from the corner of her mouth. She wiped it away with the palm of her hand. You must not doubt God's motives, her father insisted. You are far too young to doubt. The saliva glistened on his lips. He grabbed her by the arm and brought her to her feet. Now you get up those stairs and into bed. She didn't argue. On the way to the staircase, she wiped away the reforming stream of blood. She walked slowly up the steps, allowing her hand to run along the smooth, polished wood railing. Here's the milk, she heard her mother saying below. We won't be needing it, her father answered curtly. In her room, she lay in the semi-darkness that came when the full moon shone through her window, its orange-yellow light glinting from a row of religious plaques that lined one wall. Her parents' room, her mother was cooing to the twins, changing their diapers. God's little angels, she heard her mother say. Her father was tickling them, and she could hear the angels chuckling, a deep gurgle that rippled from down in their fat throats. Neither her father nor her mother came to say good night. She was being punished. Marnie was sitting in the barn, petting one of the gray kittens, postponing an errand her mother had sent her on 10 minutes earlier. The rich smell of dry golden hay filled the air. Straw covered the floor and crackled underfoot. On the far end of the building, the cows were lowing to each other, only 2 of them, whose legs had been sliced by barbed wire, and who were being made to convalesce. The kitten mewed and pawed the air below her chin. Where's Marnie? Her father's voice boomed from somewhere in the yard between the house and the barn. She was about to answer when she heard her mother call from the house. I sent her to Brown's for a recipe of Helen's. She'll be gone another 20 minutes. That's plenty of time, her father answered. The crunch of his heavy shoes on the cinder path echoed in military rhythm. Marnie knew that something was wrong, something was happening that she was not supposed to see. Quickly, she put the kitten back in the red and gold box and sprawled behind a pile of straw to watch. Her father entered, drew a bucket of water from the wall tap, and placed it in front of the kittens. Kinky hissed and arched her back. The man picked her up and shut her in an empty oat bin from which her anguished squeals boomed in a ridiculously loud echo that belonged on the African veldt and not on an American farm. Marnie almost laughed but remembered her father and suppressed the levity. He turned again to the box of kittens. Carefully, he lifted one by the scruff of the neck, petted it twice, and thrust its head under the water in the bucket. There was a violent thrashing from within the bucket, and sparkling droplets of water sprayed into the air. Her father grimaced and shoved the entire body under the smothering pool. In time, the thrashing ceased. Marnie found that her fingers were digging into the concrete floor, hurting her. Why? Why? Her father lifted the limp body from the bucket. Something pink and bloody hung from the animal's mouth. He couldn't tell whether it was the tongue or whether the precious thing had spewed its entrails into the water in a last attempt to escape the heavy, horrible death of suffocation. Soon 6 kittens were dead. Soon 6 silent furballs were dropped in the burlap sack. The top was twisted shut. He let Pinky out of the bin. The shivering cat followed him out of the barn, mewing softly, hissing when he turned to look at her. Marnie lay very still for a long time, thinking of nothing but the execution and trying desperately to understand. Had God sent her father? Was it God who told him to kill the kittens, to take them away from her? If it was, she didn't see how she could ever again stand before the golden white altar accepting communion. She stood and walked toward the house, blood dripping from her fingers, blood and cement. "Did you get the recipe?" asked her mother as Marnie slammed the kitchen door. "Mrs. Brown couldn't find it. She'll send it over tomorrow. She lied so well that she surprised herself." Did God take my kittens?" she blurted out suddenly. Her mother looked confused. "Yes," was all that she could say. "I'll get even with God. He can't do that. He can't." She ran out of the kitchen toward the staircase. Her mother watched, but didn't try to stop her. Marnie Caulfield walked slowly up the stairs, letting her hand run along the smooth, polished wood railing. At noon, when Walter Caulfield came in from the field, he heard a loud crash and the tinkling of china and the shattering of glass. He rushed into the living room to see his wife lying at the foot of the stairs. A novelty table was overturned, statuettes broken and cracked. Mary, are you hurt?" He bent quickly to her side. She looked up at him out of eyes that were very far away in distant mists. "Walt, my God, Walt, our precious angels! Bathtub, our precious angels!" Ew, that just gave me the chills. I wonder what Marnie is up to. Oh my goodness. That really did give me the goosebumps. Holy shnikes. The Magic Shop by H.G. Wells. I had seen the magic shop from afar several times. I had passed it once or twice. A shop window of alluring little objects, magic balls, magic hens, wonderful cones, ventriloquist dolls, the material of the basket trick, packs of cards that looked all right, and all that sort of thing, but never had I thought of going in until one day, almost without warning, Gip hauled me by my finger right up to the window, and so conducted himself that there was nothing for it but to take him in. I had not thought the place was there, to tell the truth. A modest-sized frontage in Regent Street, between the picture shop and the place where the chicks ran about just out of patent incubators. But there it was, sure enough. I had fancied it was down near the circus, or around the corner in Oxford Street, or even in Holborn. Always over the way and a little inaccessible it had been, with something of the mirage in its position. But here it was now, quite indisputably, and the fat end of Gip's pointing finger made a noise upon the glass. "If I was rich," said Gip, dabbing a finger at the disappearing egg, "I'd buy myself that, and that," which was the crying baby, very human, "and that," which was a mystery, and called, so a neat card asserted, "Buy one and astonish your friends." "Anything," said Gip, "will disappear under one of those cones. I have read about it in a book. And their dada is the vanishing halfpenny, only they've put it this way up so's we can't see how it's done." Gip, dear boy, inherits his mother's breeding, and he did not propose to enter the shop or worry in any way, only, quite unconsciously he lugged my finger downward, and he made his interest clear. "That," he said, and pointed to the magic bottle. "If you had that," I said, at which promising inquiry he looked up with a sudden radiance. "I could show it to Jessie," he said, thoughtful as ever of others. "It's less than 100 days to your birthday, Gibbles," I said, and laid my hand on a door handle. Gip made no answer, but his grip tightened on my finger, and so we came into the shop. It was no common shop, this. It was a magic shop, and all the prancing precedence Gip would have taken in the matter of mere toys was wanting. He left the burden of the conversation to me. It was a little narrow shop, not very well lit, and the doorbell pinged again with a plaintive note as we closed it behind us. For a moment or so we were alone and could glance about us. There was a tiger in papier-mâché on the glass case that covered the low counter, a grave, kind-eyed tiger that waggled his head in a methodical manner. There were several crystals, spheres, a china hand holding magic cards, a stock of magic fish bowls in various sizes, and an immodest magic hat that shamelessly displayed its springs. On the floor were magic mirrors, one to draw you out long and thin, one to swell your head and vanish your legs, and one to make you short and fat like a drought. And while we were laughing at these, the shopman, as I suppose, came in. At any rate, there he was behind the counter, a curious, sallow, dark man with one ear larger than the other and a chin like the toe cap of a boot. "What can we have the pleasure?" he said, spreading his long magic fingers on the glass case. And so with a start we were aware of him. "I want," I said, "to buy my little boy a few simple tricks." "Legerdemain?" he asked. "Mechanical? Domestic?" "Anything amusing," said I. Said the shopman, and scratched his head for a moment as if thinking. Then, quite distinctly, he drew from his head a glass ball. "Something in this way," he said, and held it out. The action was unexpected. I had seen the trick done at entertainments endless times before. It's part of the common stock of conjurers, but I had not expected it here. "That's good," I said with a laugh. "Isn't it?" said the shopman. Gip stretched out his disengaged hand to take this object and found merely a blank palm. "It's in your pocket," said the shopman, and there it was. "How much will that be?" I asked. "We make no charge for glass balls," said the shopman politely. "We get them." He picked one out of his elbow as he spoke. "Free." He produced another from the back of his neck and laid it beside its predecessor on the counter. Gip regarded his glass ball sagely, then directed a look of inquiry at the two on the counter, and finally brought his round-eyed scrutiny to the shopman, who smiled. "You may have those too," said the shopman, "and if you don't mind, one from my mouth. So—" Gip counseled me mutely for a moment, and then in a profound silence put away the 4 balls. resumed my reassuring finger, and nerved himself for the next event. "We get all our smaller tricks in that way," the shopman remarked. I laughed in the manner of one who subscribes to a jest. "Instead of going to the wholesale shop," I said. "Of course, it's cheaper." "In a way," the shopman said, "though we pay in the end, but not so heavily as people suppose. Our larger tricks and our daily provisions and all the other things we want, we get out of that hat. And you know, sir, if you'll excuse me saying it, there isn't a wholesale shop. Not for genuine magic goods, sir. I don't know if you noticed our inscription, the genuine magic shop." He drew a business card from his cheek and handed it to me. "Genuine," he said with his finger in the word, and added, "There's absolutely no deception, sir." He seemed to be carrying out the joke pretty thoroughly, I thought. He turned to Gip with a smile of remarkable affability. You know, are the right sort of boy." I was surprised at his knowing that, because in the interest of discipline we keep it rather a secret even at home, but Gip received it in unflinching silence, keeping a steadfast eye on him. "It's only the right sort of boy gets through that doorway." And as if by way of illustration, there came a rattling at the door, and a squeaking little voice could be faintly heard. "Nyar! I warna go in there, Dada. I warna go in there. Nyar!" And then accents of downtrodden parent urging consolations and propitiations. "It's locked, Edward," he said. "But it isn't," said I. "It is, sir," said the shopman. "Always for that sort of child." And as he spoke, we had a glimpse of the other youngster. A small white face, pallid from sweet eating and over-sapid food and distorted by evil passions. A ruthless little egotist pawing at the enchanted pain. "It's no good, sir," said the shopman, as I moved with my natural helpfulness doorward, and presently the spoiled child was carried off howling. "How do you manage that?" I said, breathing a little more freely. "Magic," said the shopman, with a careless wave of the hand, and behold, sparks of colored fire flew out of his fingers and vanished into the shadows of the shop. "You were saying," he said, addressing himself to Gip, "before you came in, that you would like one of our buy one and astonish your friends boxes?" Gip, after a gallant effort, said, "Yes, it's in your pocket." And leaning over the counter, he really had an extraordinarily long body. This amazing person produced the article in the customary conjurer's manner. "Paper," he said, and took a sheet out of the empty hat with the springs. "String," and behold, his mouth was a string box from which he drew an unending thread, which when he had tied his parcel he bit off, and it seemed to me swallowed the ball of string. And then he lit a candle at the nose of one of the ventriloquist dummies, stuck one of his fingers, which had become sealing wax red, into the flame, and so sealed the parcel. "Then there was the disappearing egg," he remarked, and produced one from within my coat breast and packed it. "And also the crying baby, very human." I handed each parcel to Gip as it was ready, and he clasped them to his chest. He said very little, but his eyes were eloquent. The clutch of his arms was eloquent. He was the playground of unspeakable emotions. These, you know, were real magics. Then with a start I discovered something moving about in the hat, something soft and jumpy. I wiped it off, and a ruffled pigeon, no doubt a Confederate, dropped out and ran on the counter and went, I fancy, into a cardboard box behind the papier-mâché tiger. "Tut-tut," said the shopman, dexterously relieving me of my headdress. "Careless bird, and, as I live, nesting." He shook my hat and shook out into his extended hand 2 or 3 eggs, a large marble, a watch, about half a dozen of the inevitable glass balls, and then crumpled, crinkled paper more and more and more, talking all the time of the way in which people neglect to brush their hats inside as well as out, politely of course, but with a certain personal application. All sorts of things accumulate, sir. Not you, of course, in particular, nearly every customer. Astonishing what they carry about with them. The crumpled paper rose and billowed on the counter more and more and more, until he was nearly hidden from us, until he was altogether hidden, and still his voice went on and on. We none of us know what the fair semblance of a human being may conceal, sir. Are we all, then, no better than brushed exteriors, whited sepulchres? His voice stopped, exactly like when you hit a neighbor's gramophone with a well-aimed brick. The same instant silence, and the rustle of the paper stopped, and everything was still. "Have you done with my hat?" I said after an interval. There was no answer. I stared at Gip, and Gip stared at me, and there were our distortions in the magic mirrors, looking very rum and grave and quiet. "I think we'll go now," I said. "Will you tell me how much all this comes to?" "I say," I said on a rather louder note, "I want the bill and my hat, please." It might have been a sniff from behind the paper pile. "Let's look behind the counter, Gip," I said. "He's making fun of us." I led Gip round the head-wagging tiger, and what do you think there was behind the counter? No one at all. Only my hat on the floor, and a common conjurer's lop-eared white rabbit lost in meditation, and looking as stupid and crumpled as only a conjurer's rabbit can do. I resumed my hat, and the rabbit lolloped a lollop or so out of my way. "Dada," said Gip, in a guilty whisper. "What is it, Gip?" said I. "I do like this shop, Dada." So should I said to myself, if the counter wouldn't suddenly extend itself to shut one off from the door, but I didn't call Gip's attention to that. "Pussy," he said, with a hand out to the rabbit as it came lolloping past us. "Pussy, do Gip a magic," and his eyes followed it as it squeezed through a door. I had certainly not remarked a moment before. Then this door opened wider, and the man with one ear larger than the other appeared again. He was smiling still, but his eye met mine with something between amusement and defiance. "You'd like to see our showroom, sir," he said with an innocent suavity. Gip tugged my finger forward. I glanced at the counter and met the shopman's eye again. I was beginning to think the magic just a little too genuine. "We haven't very much time," I said, but somehow we were inside the showroom before I could finish that. "All goods of the same quality," said the shopman, rubbing his flexible hands together. "And that is the best. Nothing in the place that isn't genuine magic and warranted thoroughly run. Excuse me, sir." I felt him pull at something that clung to my coat sleeve, and then I saw he held a little, wriggling red demon by the tail. The little creature bit and fought and tried to get out of his hand, and in a moment he tossed it carelessly behind a counter. No doubt the thing was only an image of twisted India rubber, but for the moment. And his gesture was exactly that of a man who handles some petty biting bit of vermin. I glanced at Gip, but Gip was looking at the magic rocking horse. I was glad he hadn't seen the thing. "I say," I said in an undertone, and indicating Gip and the red demon with my eyes, "you haven't many things like that about, have you?" "None of ours. Probably brought it with you," said the shopman, also in an undertone, and with more dazzling smile than ever. "Astonishing what people will carry about with them unawares." And then to Gip, "Do you see anything you fancy here?" There were many things that Gip fancied there. He turned to this astonishing tradesman with mingled confidence and respect. "Is that a magic sword?" he said. "A magic toy sword. It neither bends, breaks, nor cuts the fingers. It renders the bearer invincible in battle against anyone under 18. Half a crown to 7 and 6 according to size. These panoplies on cards are for juvenile knights errant and very useful. Shield of safety, sandals of swiftness, helmet of invisibility." "Oh, Daddy!" gasped Gip. I'm trying to find out what they cost, but the shopman did not heed me. He had got Gip now. He had got him away from my finger. He had embarked upon the exposition of all his confounded stock, and nothing was going to stop him. Presently I saw, with a qualm of distrust and something very like jealousy, that Gip had hold of this person's finger, as usually he has hold of mine. No doubt the fellow was interesting, I thought, and had an interesting faked lot of stuff. Really good faked stuff. Still, I wandered after them, saying very little, but keeping an eye on this prestidigital fellow. After all, Gip was enjoying it, and no doubt when the time came to go, we should be able to go quite easily. It was a long, rambling place, that showroom. Hold on, guys, I lost my place because there was a fucking beetle on my book. That showroom, a gallery broken up by stands and stalls and pillars with archways leading off to other departments, in which the queerest-looking assistants loafed and stared at one end, with perplexing mirrors and curtains. So perplexing indeed were these that it was presently unable to make out the door by which we had come. The shopman showed Gip magic trains that ran without steam or clockwork, just as you set the signals, and then some very, very valuable boxes of soldiers that all came alive directly you took off the lid and said, "I myself haven't a very quick ear, and it was a tongue-twisting sound, but Gip, he has his mother's ear. Got it in no time." "Bravo," said the shopman, putting the min back into the box unceremoniously and handing it to Gip. "Now," said the shopman, and in a moment Gip had made all alive again. "You'll take that box?" asked the shopman. "We'll take that box," said I, "unless you charge its full value, in which case it would need a trust magnate." "Dear heart, no!" And the shopman swept the little min back again, shut the lid, waved the box in the air, and there it was in brown paper, tied up, and with Gip's full name and address on the paper. The shopman laughed at my amazement. "This is the genuine magic," he said. "The real thing." "It's a little too genuine for my taste," I said again. After that he fell to showing Gip tricks, odd tricks, and still odder the way they were done. He explained them, he turned them inside out, and there was a dear little chap nodding his busy bit of a head in the sagest manner. I did not attend as well as I might. "Hey, presto!" said the magic shopman, and then would come the clear small "Hey, presto!" of the boy. But I was distracted by other things. It was being borne in upon me just how tremendously rum this place was. It was, so to speak, inundated by a sense of rumness. There was something vaguely rum about the fixtures even, about the ceiling, about the floor, about the casually distributed chairs. I had a queer feeling that whenever I wasn't looking at them straight, they went askew and moving about, and played a noiseless puss in the corner behind my back. And the cornice has a serpentine design with masts altogether too expressive for proper plaster. Then abruptly my attention was caught by one of the odd-looking assistants. He was some way off and evidently unaware of my presence. I saw a sort of three-quarter length of him over a pile of toys and through an arch, and, he was leaning against a pillar in an idle sort of way, doing the most horrid things with his features. The particular horrid thing he did was with his nose. He did it just as though he was idle and wanted to amuse himself. First of all, it was a short, blobby nose, and then suddenly he shot it out like a telescope. And then out it flew and became thinner and thinner until it was like a long, red, flexible whip. Like a thing in a nightmare it was. He flourished it about and flung it forth as a fly fisher flings his line. My instant thought was that Gip mustn't see him. I turned about, and there was Gip, quite preoccupied with the shopman, and thinking no evil. They were whispering together and looking at me. Gip was standing on a stool, and the shopman was holding a sort of big drum in his hand. "Hide and seek, Dada!" cried Gip. "You are he!" And before I could do anything to prevent it, the shopman had clapped the big drum over him. I saw what was up directly. "Take that off," I cried. "This instant! You'll frighten the boy. Take it off!" The shopman, with the unequal ears, did so without a word, and held the big cylinder towards me to show its emptiness, and the little stool was vacant. In that instant my boy had utterly disappeared. Perhaps that sinister something that comes like a hand out of the unseen and grips your heart about. It takes your common self away and leaves you tense and deliberate, neither slow nor hasty, neither angry nor afraid. So it was with me. I came up to this grinning shopman and kicked the stool aside. "Stop this folly," I said. "Where is my boy?" "You see," he said, still displaying the drum's interior, "there is no deception." I put out my hand to grip him, and he eluded me by a dexterous movement. I snatched again, and he turned from me and pushed open a door to escape. "Stop!" I said, and he laughed, receding. I leapt after him into utter darkness. Thud. "Nor bless my 'eart, I didn't see you coming, sir." I was in Regent Street, and I had collided with a decent-looking working man, and a yard away perhaps, and looking extremely perplexed with himself, was Gip. There was some sort of apology, and then Gip had turned and come to me with a bright little smile, as though for a moment he had missed me, and he was carrying 4 parcels in his arm. He secured immediate possession of my finger. For the second I was rather at a loss. I stared round to see the door of the magic shop, and behold, it was not there. There was no door, no shop, nothing. Only the common pilaster between the shop, where they sell pictures, and the window with the chicks. I did the only thing possible in that mental tumult. I walked straight to the curbstone and held up my umbrella for a cab. "Hansoms," said Gip in a note of culminating exultation. I helped him in, recalled my address with an effort, and got in also. Something unusual proclaimed itself in my tailcoat pocket, and I felt and discovered a glass ball. With a petulant expression I flung it into the street. Gip said nothing. For a space neither of us spoke. "Dada?" said Gip at last. "That was a proper shop." I came round with that to the problem of just how the whole thing had seemed to him. He looked completely undamaged. So far, good. He was neither scared nor unhinged. He was simply tremendously satisfied with the afternoon's entertainment, and there in his arms were the 4 parcels. Confound it! What could be in them? I said, "Little boys can't go to shops like that every day." He received this with his usual stoicism, and for a moment I was sorry I was his father and not his mother, and so couldn't suddenly there coram publico in our handsome kissum. After all, I thought, the thing wasn't so very bad. But it was only when we opened the parcels that I really began to be reassured. 3 of them contained boxes of soldiers. Quite ordinary lead soldiers, but of so good a quality as to make Gip altogether forget that originally these parcels had been magic tricks of the only genuine sort. And the fourth contained a kitten, a little living white kitten, in excellent health and appetite and temper. I saw this unpacking with a sort of provisional relief. I hung about in the nursery for quite an unconscionable time. That happened 6 months ago, and now I am beginning to believe it is all right. The kitten had only the magic natural to all kittens, and the soldiers seem as steady a company as any colonel could desire. And Gip? The intelligent parent will understand that I have to go cautiously with Gip, but I went so far as this one day I said, "How would you like your soldiers to come alive, Gip, and march about by themselves?" "Mine do," said Gip. "I just have to say a word I know before I open the lid." "Then they march about alone?" "Oh, quite, Dada. I shouldn't like them if they didn't do that." I displayed no unbecoming surprise, and since then I have taken occasion to drop in upon him once or twice unannounced, when the soldiers were about, but so far I've never discovered them performing in anything like a magical manner. It's so difficult to tell. There's also a question of finance. I have an incurable habit of paying bills. I've been up and down Regent Street several times looking for that shop. I'm inclined to think, indeed, that in that matter honor is dissatisfied, and that since Gip's name and address are known to them, I may very well leave it to these people, whoever they may be, to send in their bill in their own time. Miriam by Truman, Capote. Before we go on any further, I just wanted to let you know I have made an executive decision. I'm not going to do music breaks on story times because it's not live, so I can just pause and go hit the head when I need to, so there's no reason you should have a music break when we don't really need to take a break. You can always just pause if you need a break and then press play again. But yeah, I just wanted to give you a heads up on that. Let's continue on with Miriam. For several years, Mrs. H.T. Miller had lived alone in a pleasant apartment, 2 rooms with a kitchenette, and a remodeled brownstone near the East River. She was a widow. Mr. H.T. Miller had left a reasonable amount of insurance. Her interests were narrow, she had no friends to speak of, and she rarely journeyed farther than the corner grocer. The other people in the house never seemed to notice her. Her clothes were matter-of-fact, her hair iron gray, clipped and casually waved. She did not use cosmetics, her features were plain and inconspicuous, and on her last birthday she was 61. Her activities were seldom spontaneous. She kept the 2 rooms immaculate, smoked an occasional cigarette, prepared her own meals, and tended a cannery. Then she met Miriam. It was snowing that night. Mrs. Miller had finished drying the supper dishes and was thumbing through an afternoon paper when she saw an advertisement of a picture playing at a neighborhood theater. The title sounded good, so she struggled into her beaver coat, laced her goulashes, and left the apartment. Leaving one light burning in the foyer, she found nothing more disturbing than a sensation of darkness. The snow was fine, falling gently, not yet making an impression on pavement. The wind from the river cut only at a street crossing. Mrs. Miller hurried, her head bowed, oblivious as a mole burrowing a blind path. She stopped at a drugstore and bought a pack of peppermints. A long line stretched in front of the box office. She took her place at the end. There would be, a tired voice groaned, a short wait for all seats. Mrs. Miller rummaged in her leather handbag till she collected exactly the correct change for admission. The line seemed to be taking its own time, and looking around for some distraction, she suddenly became conscious of a little girl standing under the edge of the marquee. Her hair was the longest and strangest Mrs. Miller had ever seen. Absolutely silver white, like an albino's. It flowed waist-length in smooth, loose lines. She was thin and fragilely constructed. There was a simple, special elegance in the way she stood with her thumbs in the pockets of a tailored plum velvet coat. Mrs. Miller felt oddly excited, and when the little girl glanced toward her, she smiled warmly. The little girl walked over and said, "Would you care to do me a favor?" "I'd be glad to if I can," said Mrs. Miller. "Oh, it's quite easy. I merely want you to buy a ticket for me. They won't let me in otherwise. Here, I have the money." And gracefully she handed Mrs. Miller 2 dimes and a nickel. They went over to the theater together. An usherette directed them to the lounge, and in 20 minutes the picture would be over. "I feel just like a genuine criminal," said Mrs. Miller gaily as she sat down. "I mean, that sort of thing's against the law, isn't it? I do hope I haven't done the wrong thing. Your mother knows where you are, dear. I mean, she does, doesn't she?" The little girl said nothing. She unbuttoned her coat and folded it across her lap. Her dress underneath was prim and dark blue. A gold chain dangled about her neck, and her fingers, sensitive and musical-looking, toyed with it. Examining her more attentively, Mrs. Miller decided the truly distinctive feature was not her hair, but her eyes. They were haze, steady, lacking any childlike quality whatsoever, and, because of their size, seemed to consume her small face. Miss Miller offered a peppermint. "What's your name, dear?" "Miriam," she said, as though in some curious way it were information already familiar. "Why, isn't that funny? My name's Miriam, too. And it's not a terribly common name either. Now, don't tell me your last name's Miller." "Just Miriam." "But isn't that funny?" "Moderately," said Miriam, and rolled the peppermint on her tongue. Mrs. Miller flushed and shifted uncomfortably. "You have such a large vocabulary for such a little girl." "Do I?" "Well, yes," said Mrs. Miller, hastily changing the topic to, "Do you like the movies?" "I really wouldn't know," said Miriam. "I've never been before." Women began filling the lounge. The rumble of the newsreel bombs exploded in the distance. Mrs. Miller rose, tucking her purse under her arm. "I guess I'd better be running now if I want to get a seat," she said. "It was nice to have met you." Miriam nodded, ever so slightly. It snowed all week. Wheels and footsteps moved soundlessly on the street, as if the business of living continued secretly behind a pale but impenetrable curtain. In the falling quiet there was no sky or earth, only snow lifting in the wind, frosting the window glass, chilling the rooms, deadening and hushing the city. At all hours it was necessary to keep a lamp lighted, and Mrs. Miller lost track of the days. Friday was no different from Saturday, and on Sunday she went to the grocery, closed of course. That evening she scrambled eggs and fixed a bowl of tomato soup. Then, after putting on a flannel robe and cold creaming her face, she propped herself up in bed with a hot water bottle under her feet. She was reading the Times when the doorbell rang. At first she thought it was, or might have been, a mistake, and whoever it was would go away, but It rang and settled to a persistent buzz. She looked at the clock. A little after 11. It did not seem possible. She was always asleep by 10. Climbing out of bed, she trotted barefoot across the living room. "I'm coming. Please be patient." The latch was caught. She turned it this way, and the bell never paused an instant. "Stop it!" she cried. The bolt gave way, and she opened the door an inch. "What in heaven's name?" "Hello," said Miriam. "Oh, why, hello," said Mrs. Miller, stepping hesitantly into the hall. "You're that little girl." "Thought you'd never answer, but I just kept my finger on the button. I knew you were home. Aren't you glad to see me?" Mrs. Miller did not know what to say. Miriam, she saw, wore the same plum velvet coat, and now she had also a beret to match. Her white hair was braided in 2 shining plaits and looped at the ends with enormous white ribbons. "Since I've waited so long, you could at least let me in," she said. It's awfully late." Miriam regarded her blankly. "What difference does that make? Let me in. It's cold out here, and I have on a silk dress." Then with a little gentle gesture, she urged Mrs. Miller aside and passed into the apartment. She dropped her coat and beret on a chair. She was indeed wearing a silk dress, white silk in February. The skirt was beautifully pleated and the sleeves long. It made a faint rustle as she strolled about the room. "I like your place," she said. "I like the rug. Blue's my favorite color." She touched a paper rose in a vase on the coffee table. "Imitation," she commented wanly. "How sad. Rose in a vase on a coffee table. Aren't imitations sad?" She seated herself on a sofa, daintily spreading her skirt. What do you want?" asked Mrs. Miller. "Sit down," said Miriam. "It makes me nervous to see people stand." Mrs. Miller sank to a hassock. "What do you want?" she repeated. "You know, I don't think you're glad I came." For a second, Mrs. Miller was without an answer. Her hand motioned vaguely. Miriam giggled and pressed back in a mound of chintz pillows. Mrs. Miller observed that the girl was less pale than she remembered her. Cheeks were flushed. "How did you know where I lived?" Miriam frowned. "That's no question at all. What's your name?" "What's mine?" "But I'm not listed in the phone book." "Oh, let's talk about something else," Mrs. Miller said. "Your mother must be insane to let a child like you wander around at all hours of the night and in such ridiculous clothes. You must be out of her mind." Miriam got up and moved to a corner where a covered bird cage hung from a ceiling chain. She peeked beneath the cover. "It's a canary," she said. "Would you mind if I woke him? I'd like to hear him sing." "Leave Tommy alone," said Mrs. Miller anxiously. "Don't you dare wake him." "Certainly," said Miriam. "But I don't see why I can't hear him sing." And then, "Have you anything to eat? I'm starving. Even milk and jam sandwich would be fine." "Look," said Mrs. Miller, arising from the hassock. "Look, if I make some nice sandwiches, will you be a good child and run along home? It's past midnight, I'm sure." "It's snowing," reproached Miriam, "and cold and dark." "Well, you shouldn't have come here to begin with," said Mrs. Miller, struggling to control her voice. I can't help the weather. If you want anything to eat, you'll have to promise to leave." Miriam brushed a braid against her cheek. Her eyes were thoughtful, as if weighing the proposition. She turned toward the birdcage. "Very well," she said. "I promise." How old is she? 10? 11? Mrs. Miller in the kitchen unsealed a jar of strawberry preserves and cut 4 slices of bread. She poured a glass of milk and paused to light a cigarette. And why has she come? Her hand shook as she held the match, fascinated till it burned her finger. Canary was singing as he did in the morning and at no other time. "Miriam," she called. "Miriam, I told you not to disturb Tommy." There was no answer. She called again. All she heard was the canary. She inhaled a cigarette and discovered she had lighted the cork tip end, and, oh, really, she mustn't lose her temper. She carried the food in on a tray and set it on the coffee table. She saw first that the birdcage still wore its night cover and Tommy was singing. It gave her a queer sensation, and no one was in the room. Mrs. Miller went through an alcove leading to her bedroom. At the door, she caught her breath. "What are you doing?" she asked. Miriam glanced up, and in her eyes there was a look that was not ordinary. She was standing by the bureau, the jewel case open before her. For a minute she studied Mrs. Miller, forcing her eyes to meet, and she smiled. "There's nothing good here," she said, "but I like this." Her hand held a cameo brooch. "It's charming." "Suppose, perhaps, you'd better put it back," said Mrs. Miller, feeling suddenly the need of some support. She leaned against the doorframe. Her head was unbearably heavy. The pressure weighted the rhythm of her heartbeat. The light seemed to flutter defectively. "Please, child, a gift from my husband." "But it's beautiful and I want it," said Miriam. "Give it to me." As she stood, striving to shape a sentence which would somehow save the brooch, it came to Mrs. Miller there was no one to whom she might turn. She was alone, a fact that had not been among her thoughts for a long time. Its sheer emphasis was stunning, but here in her own room, in the hushed snow city, evidences she could not ignore or, she knew, with startling clarity, resist. Miriam ate ravenously, and when the sandwiches and milk were gone, her fingers made cobweb movements over the plate, gathering crumbs. The cameo gleamed on her blouse and blonde profile like a trick reflection of its wearer. "That was very nice," she sighed. "Though now an almond cake or a cherry would be ideal. Sweets are lovely, don't you think?" Mrs. Miller was perched precariously on the hassock, smoking a cigarette. Her hairnet had slipped lopsided, and a loose strand straggled down her face. Her eyes were stupidly concentrated on nothing, and her cheeks were mottled in red patches, as though a fierce slap had left permanent marks. "Is there a candy? A cake?" Mrs. Miller tapped ash on the rug. Her head swayed slightly as she tried to focus her eyes. "You promised to leave if I made the sandwiches," she said. "Dear me, did I?" "It was a promise, and I'm tired, and I don't feel well at all." "Mustn't fret," said Miriam. "I'm only teasing." She picked up her coat, slung it over her arm, and arranged her beret in front of a mirror. Presently she bent close to Mrs. Miller and whispered, "Kiss me good night." "Please, I'd rather not," said Mrs. Miller. Miriam lifted a shoulder, arched an eyebrow. "As you like," she said, and went directly to the coffee table, seized the vase containing the paper roses, carried it to where the hard surface of the floor lay bare, and hurled it downward. glass sprayed in all directions, and she stamped her foot on the bouquet. Then slowly she walked to the door, but before closing it, she looked back at Mrs. Miller with a slyly innocent curiosity. Mrs. Miller spent the next day in bed, rising once to feed the canary and drink a cup of tea. She took her temperature and had none, yet her dreams were feverishly agitated. Their unbalanced mood lingered even as she lay staring wide-eyed at the ceiling. One dream threaded through the others like an elusively mysterious theme in a complicated symphony, and the scenes it depicted were sharply outlined as though sketched by a hand of gifted intensity. A small girl wearing a bridal gown and a wreath of leaves led a gray procession down a mountain path, and among them there was unusual silence till a woman at the rear asked, "Where is she taking us?" "No one knows," said an old man marching in front. "But isn't she pretty?" volunteered a third voice. "Isn't she like a frost flower? So shining and white." Tuesday morning she woke up feeling better. Harsh slats of sunlight slanting through Venetian blinds shed a disrupting light on her unwholesome fancies. She opened the window to discover a thawed, mild spring day. A sweep of clean new clouds crumpled against a vastly blue, out-of-season sky, and across the low line of rooftops she could see the river and smoke curving from the tugboat stacks in a warm wind. A great silver truck plowed the snowbanked street, its machine sound humming on the air. After straightening the apartment, she went to the grocer's, cashed a check, and continued to Schraff's, where she ate breakfast and chatted happily with the waitress. Oh, it was a wonderful day, more like a holiday, and would be so foolish to go home. She boarded a Lexington Avenue bus and rode it up to 86th Street. It was here that she had decided to do a little shopping. She had no idea what she wanted or needed, but she idled along, intent only upon the passers-by, brisk and preoccupied, who gave her a disturbing sense of separateness. It was while waiting at the corner of 3rd Avenue that she saw the man, an old man, bow-legged and stooped under an armload of bulging packages. He wore a shabby brown coat and a checkered cap. Suddenly she realized they were exchanging a smile. There was nothing friendly about this smile, it was merely 2 cold flickers of recognition, but she was certain she had never seen him before. He was standing next to an El Pilar, and as she crossed the street he turned and followed. He kept quite close. From the corner of her eye she watched his reflection wavering in the shop windows. Then in the middle of the block she stopped and faced him. He stopped also and cocked his head, grinning. But what could she say, do, here in broad daylight, on 86th Street? It was useless, and despising her own helplessness, she quickened her steps. Now 2nd Avenue is a dismal street, made from scraps and ends, part cobblestone, part asphalt, part cement, and its atmosphere of desertion is permanent. Mrs. Miller walked 5 blocks without meeting anyone, and all the while the steady crunch of his footfalls in the snow stayed near. And when she came to the florist shop, the sound was still with her. She hurried inside and watched through the glass door as the old man passed. He kept his eyes straight ahead and didn't slow his pace, but he did one strange thing. He tipped his cap. "6 white ones, did you say?" asked the florist. "Yes," she told him. "White roses." From there she went to the glassware store and selected a vase, presumably a replacement for the one Miriam had broken, though the price was intolerable and the vase itself, she thought, grotesquely vulgar. But a series of unaccountable purchases had begun as if by prearranged plan of which she had not the least knowledge or control. She bought a bag of glazed cherries, and at a place called the Knickerbocker Bakery she paid 40 cents for 6 almond cakes. Within the last hour the weather had turned cold again. Like blurred lenses, winter clouds cast a shadow over the sun, and the skeleton of an early dusk colored the sky. A damp mist, mixed with the wind and the voices of a few children who romped high on mountains of gutter snow, seemed lonely and cheerless. Soon the first flake fell, and when Mrs. Miller reached the brownstone house, snow was falling in a swift scream, and foot tracks vanished as they were printed. The white roses were arranged decoratively in the vase. The glazed cherry shone on a ceramic plate. The almond cakes dusted with sugar awaited a hand. The canary fluttered on its swing and picked at a bar of seed. At precisely 5 the doorbell rang. Mrs. Miller knew who it was. The hem of her housecoat trailed as she crossed the floor. "Is that you?" she called. "Naturally," said Miriam, word resounding shrilly from the hall. "Open this door." "Go away," said Mrs. Miller. "Please hurry. I have a heavy package." "Go away," said Miss Miller. She turned to the living room, lighted a cigarette, sat down, and calmly listened to the buzzer. On and on and on. "You might as well leave. I have no intention of letting you in." Shortly the bell stopped. For possibly 10 minutes Mrs. Miller did not move. Then, hearing no sound, she concluded Miriam had gone. She tiptoed to the door and opened it a sliver. Miriam was half reclined atop a cardboard box with a beautiful French doll cradled in her arms. "Really? I thought you were never coming," she said peevishly. "Here, let me get this in. It's awfully heavy." It was not spell-like compulsion that Mrs. Miller felt, but rather a curious passivity. She brought in the box, Miriam, the doll. Miriam curled up on the sofa, not troubling to remove her coat or beret, and watched disinterestedly as Mrs. Miller dropped the box and stood trembling, trying to catch her breath. "Thank you," she said. In the daylight, she looked pinched and drawn, her hair less luminous. The French doll she was loving wore an exquisite powdered wig, and its idiot glass eyes sought solace in Miriam's. "I have a surprise," she continued. "Look into the box." Kneeling, Mrs. Miller parted the flaps and lifted out another doll. Then a blue dress, which she recalled as one Miriam had worn that first night at the theater. And of the remainder, she said, "It's all clothes. Why?" "Because I've come to live with you," said Miriam, twisting a cherry stem. "Wasn't it nice of you to buy me the cherries?" "But you can't. For God's sake, go away. Go away and leave me alone." "And the roses and the almond cakes, how really wonderfully generous. You know, these cherries are delicious. The last place I lived was with an old man, and he was terribly poor, and we never had good things to eat, but I think I'll be happy here." She paused to snuggle her doll closer. "Now, if you'll just show me where to put my things." Mrs. Miller's face dissolved into a mask of ugly red lines. She began to cry, and it was an unnatural, tearless sort of weeping, as though, not having wept for a long time, she had forgotten how. Carefully, she edged backward till she touched the door. She fumbled through the hall and down the stairs to a landing below. She pounded frantically on the door of the first apartment she came to. A short, red-headed man answered, and she pushed past him. "Say, what the hell is this?" he said. Anything wrong, lover? Asked a young woman who appeared from the kitchen drying her hands, and it was to her that Mrs. Miller turned. Listen, she cried. I'm ashamed of behaving this way, but, well, I'm Mrs. H.T. Miller and I live upstairs, and she pressed her hands over her face. It sounds so absurd. The woman guided her to a chair while the man excitedly rattled pocket change. Yeah? I live upstairs and there's a little girl visiting me and I suppose that I'm afraid of her. She won't leave and I can't make her and she's going to do something terrible. She's already stolen my cameo, but she's about to do something worse, something terrible. The man asked, She a relative, huh? Miss Miller shook her head. I don't know who she is. Her name's Miriam, but I don't know for certain who she is. You gotta calm down, honey, said the woman, stroking Mrs. Miller's arm. Harry, he'll tend to this kid. Go on, lover. And Mrs. Miller said, Doors open, 5A. After the man left, the woman brought a towel and bathed Mrs. Miller's face. You're very kind, Mrs. Miller said. I'm sorry to act like such a fool, only this wicked child. Sure, honey, consoled the woman. Now you better take it easy. Mrs. Miller rested her head in the crook of her arm. She was quiet enough to be asleep. The woman turned a radio dial, a piano and a husky voice filled the silence, and the woman, tapping her foot, kept excellent time. Maybe we ought to go up too, she said. I don't want to see her again. I don't want to be anywhere near her. But what you should have done, you should have called a cop. Presently they heard the man on the stairs. He strode into the room, frowning and scratching the back of his neck. Nobody there, he said, honestly embarrassed. She must have beat it. Harry, you're a jerk, announced the woman. We've been sitting here like the whole time, and we would have seen... She stopped abruptly, for the man's glance was sharp. I looked all over, he said, and there just ain't nobody there. Nobody, understand? Tell me, said Mrs. Miller, rising. Tell me, did you see a large box or a doll? No, ma'am, I didn't. And the woman, as if delivered a verdict, said, Well, for crying out loud. Mrs. Miller entered her apartment softly. She walked to the center of the room and stood quite still. No, in a sense it had not changed. The roses, the cakes, and the cherries were in place, but this was an empty room, emptier than if the furnishings and familiars were not present. Lifeless and petrified as a funeral parlor. The sofa loomed before her with a strangeness. Its vacancy had a meaning that would have been less penetrating and terrible had Miriam been curled on it. She gazed fixedly at the space where she remembered setting the box, and for a moment the hassock spun desperately. And she looked through the window. Surely the river was a real thing. Miriam, so vividly there, and yet where was she? Where? As though moving in a dream, she sank to a chair. The room was losing shape. It was dark and getting darker, and there was nothing to be done about it. She could not lift her hand to light a lamp. Suddenly closing her eyes, she felt an upward surge like a diver emerging from some deeper, greener depth. In times of terror or immense distress, there are moments when the mind waits as though for a revelation, while a skein of calm is woven over thought. It is like a sleep or a supernatural trance, and during this lull one is aware of a force of quite quiet reasoning. Well, what if she had never really known a girl named Miriam? That she had been foolishly frightened on the street? In the end, like everything else, it was of no importance. For the only thing she had lost to Miriam was her identity, but now she knew she had found again the person who lived in this room, who cooked her own meals, who owned a canary, who was someone she could trust and believe in. Mrs. H.T. Miller. Listening in contentment, she became aware of a double sound. A bureau drawer opening and closing. She seemed to hear it long after completion. opening and closing, then gradually the harshness of it was replaced by the murmur of a silk dress, and this delicately faint was moving nearer and swelling in intensity till the walls trembled with the vibration and the room was caving under a wave of whisper. Mrs. Miller stiffened and opened her eyes to a dull, direct stare. "Hello," said Miriam. The Telltale Heart by Edgar Allan Poe. True. Nervous. Very, very dreadfully nervous. I had been and am, but why will you say that I am mad? The disease had sharpened my senses, not destroyed, not dulled them. Above all was the sense of hearing acute. I heard all things in the heaven and in the earth. I heard many things in hell. How then am I mad? Hearken and observe how healthily, how calmly I can tell you the whole story. It is impossible to say how first the idea entered my brain, but once conceived it haunted me day and night. Object there was none, passion there was none. I loved the old man. He had never wronged me, he had never given me insult. For his gold I had no desire. I think it was his eye, yes, it was this. He had the eye of a vulture, a pale blue eye with a film over it. Whenever it fell upon me, my blood ran cold, and so by degrees, very gradually, I made up my mind to take the life of the old man and thus rid myself of the eye forever. Now this is the point. You fancy me mad. Madmen know nothing, but you should have seen me. You should have seen how wisely I proceeded, with what caution, with what foresight, with what dissimulation I went to work. I was never kinder to the old man than during the whole week before I killed him, and every night about midnight I turned the latch of his door and opened it, oh so gently. And then, when I had made an opening sufficient for my head, I put in a dark lantern, all closed that no light shone out, and then I thrust in my head. Oh, you would have laughed to see how cunningly I thrust it in. I moved it slowly, very, very slowly, so that I might not disturb the old man's sleep. It took me an hour to place my whole head within the opening so far that I could see him as he lay upon his bed. Ha! Would a madman have been so wise as this? And then, when my head was well in the room, I undid the lantern cautiously, oh so cautiously, for the hinges creaked. I undid it just so much that a single thin ray fell upon the vulture eye. And this I did for 7 long nights, every night just at midnight, but I found the eye always closed, and so it was impossible to do the work. For it was not the old man who vexed me, but his evil eye. And every morning when the day broke, I went boldly into the chamber and spoke courageously to him, calling him by name in a hearty tone and inquiring how he has passed the night. So you see, he would have been a very profound old man indeed, to suspect that every night, just at 12, I looked in upon him while he slept. Upon the 8th night, I was more than usually cautious in opening the door. A watch's minute hand moves more quickly than did mine. Never before that night had I felt the extent of my own powers, of my sagacity. I could scarcely contain my feelings of triumph to think that there I was opening the door little by little, and he not even to dream of my secret deeds or thoughts. I fairly chuckled at the idea, and perhaps he heard me, for he moved on the bed suddenly, as if startled. Now you may think that I drew back, but no. His room was as black as pitch with a thick darkness, for the shutters were close fastened, through fear of robbers, and so I knew that he could not see the opening of the door, and I kept pushing it on steadily. I had my head in and was about to open the lantern when my thumb slipped upon the tin fastening, and the old man sprang up in bed, crying out, "Who's there?" I kept quite still and said nothing. For a whole hour I did not move a muscle, and in the meantime I did not hear him lie down. He was still sitting up in the bed listening, just as I have done, night after night, hearkening to the death watches in the wall. Presently I heard a slight groan, and I knew it was the groan of mortal terror. It was not a groan of pain or of grief, oh no! It was the low, stifled sound that arises from the bottom of the soul when overcharged with awe. I knew the sound well. Many a night, just at midnight, when all the world slept, it was welled up from my own bosom, deepening with its dreadful echo the terrors that distracted me. I say I knew it well. I knew what the old man felt and pitied him, although I chuckled at heart. I knew that he had been laying awake ever since the first slight noise, when he had turned in the bed. His fears had been ever since growing upon him. He had been trying to fancy them causeless, but could not. He had been saying to himself, "It is nothing but the wind in the chimney. It is only a mouse crossing the floor. Or it is merely a cricket which has made a single chirp." Yes, he had been trying to comfort himself with these suppositions, but he had found all in vain. All in vain, because death, in approaching him, had talked with his black shadow before him, and enveloped the victim, and it was the mournful influence of the unperceived shadow that caused him to feel, although he neither saw nor heard, to feel the presence of my head within the room. When I had waited for a long time very patiently without hearing him lie down, I resolved to open a very, very little crevice in the lantern, so I opened it. You cannot imagine how stealthily, until at length a simple dim ray, like the thread of the spider, shot from out the crevice, and fell full upon the vulture eye. It was open, wide, wide open, and I grew furious as I gazed upon it. I saw it with perfect distinctness, all a dull blue, with a hideous veil over it that chilled the very marrow in my bones. But I could see nothing else of the old man's face or person, for I had directed the ray as if by instinct, precisely upon the damned spot. And have I not told you that what you mistake for madness is but over-acuteness of the sense? Now I say there came to my ears a low, dull, quick sound, such as a watch makes when enveloped in cotton. I knew that sound well, too. It was the beating of the old man's heart. It increased my fury as the beating of the drum stimulates the soldier into courage. But even yet I refrained and kept still. I scarcely breathed. I held the lantern motionless. I tried how steadily I could maintain the ray upon the eye. Meantime the hellish tattoo of the heart increased. It grew quicker and louder, and louder, and louder every instant. The old man's terror must have been extreme. It grew louder, I say, louder every moment. Do you mark me well? I have told you that I am nervous, so I am. And now at the dead hour of the night, amid the dreadful silence of that old house, so strange a noise as this excited me to uncontrollable terror. Yet for some minutes longer I refrained and stood still. The beating grew louder and louder. I thought the heart must burst, and now a new anxiety seized me. The sound would be heard by a neighbor. The old man's hour had come. With a loud yell I threw open the lantern and leaped into the room. He shrieked once only, and in an instant I dragged him to the floor and pulled the heavy bed over him. I then smiled gaily to find the deed so far done, but for many minutes the heart beat on with a muffled sound. This, however, did not vex me. It would not be heard through the wall. At length it ceased. The old man was dead. I removed the bed and examined the corpse. Yes, he was stone dead. I placed my hand upon the heart and held it there many minutes. There was no pulsation. He was stone dead. His eye would trouble me no more. If still you think me mad, you will think so no longer when I describe the wise precautions I took for the concealment of the body. The night waned, and I worked hastily, but in silence. First of all, I dismembered the corpse. I cut off the head and the arms and the legs. I then took up 3 planks from the flooring of the chamber and deposited all between the scantlings. I then replaced the boards so cleverly, so cunningly, that no human eye, not even his, could have detected anything wrong. There was nothing to wash out, no stain of any kind, no blood spot whatever. I had been too wary for that. A tub had caught all. Ha! When I had made an end of these labors, it was 4 o'clock, still dark as midnight. As the bell sounded the hour, there came a knocking at the street door. I went down to open it with a light heart, for what had I now to fear? There entered 3 men who introduced themselves with perfect suavity as officers of the police. A shriek had been heard by a neighbor during the night. Suspicion of foul play had been aroused. Information had been lodged at the police office, and they, the officers, had been deputed to search the premises. I smiled, for what had I to fear? I bade the gentleman welcome. The shriek, I said, was my own in a dream. The old man I mentioned was absent in the country. I took my visitors all over the house. I bade them search well. I led them at length to his chamber. I showed them his treasures, secure and undisturbed. In the enthusiasm of my confidence, I brought chairs into the room and desired them here to rest from their fatigues, while I myself, in the wild audacity of my perfect triumph, placed my own seat upon the very spot beneath which reposed the corpse of the victim. The officers were satisfied my manner had convinced them. I was singularly at ease. They sat, and while I answered cheerily, they chattered of familiar things. But ere long, I felt myself getting pale and wished them gone. My head ached, and I fancied a ringing in my ears, but still they sat and still chatted. The ringing became more distinct. It continued and became more distinct. I talked more freely to get rid of the feeling, but it continued and gained definiteness until at length I found that the noise was not within my ears. No doubt I now grew very pale, but I talked more fluently and with a heightened voice. Yet the sound increased, and what could I do? It was a low, dull, quick sound, much such a sound as a watch makes when enveloped in cotton. I gasped for breath, and yet the officers heard it not. I talked more quickly, more vehemently, but the noise steadily increased. I arose, more argued about trifles in a high city, with violent gesticulations, but the noise steadily increased. Why would they not be gone? I paced the floor to and fro with heavy strides, as if excited to fury by the observations of the men, but the noise steadily increased. Oh God, what could I do? I foamed, I raved, I swore. I swung the chair upon which I had been sitting and grated it upon the boards, but the noise arose over all and continually increased. It grew louder, 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 and still the men chatted pleasantly and smiled. Was it possible they heard not? Almighty God! No, no. Of my horror, this I thought, and this I think. But anything was better than this agony, anything was more tolerable than this derision. I could bear those hypocritical smiles no longer. I felt that I must scream or die, and now again, hark! Louder, 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 louder. Villains! I shrieked. Dissemble no more, I admit the deed. Tear up the planks. Here, here, it is the beating of his hideous heart. Genesis and Catastrophe, a True Story by Roald Dahl. Everything is normal, the doctor was saying. Just lie back and relax. His voice was miles away in the distance, and he seemed to be shouting at her. You have a son. What? You have a fine son, you understand that, don't you? A fine son. Did you hear him crying? Is he all right, Doctor? Of course he is all right. Please let me see him. You'll see him in a moment. You are certain he is all right? I am quite certain. Is he still crying? Try to rest. There is nothing to worry about. Why has he stopped crying? Doctor, what happened? Don't excite yourself, please. Everything is normal. I want to see him. Please let me see him. Dear lady, the doctor said, patting her hand, you have a fine, strong, healthy child. Don't you believe me when I tell you that? What is the woman over there doing to him? Your baby is being made to look pretty for you, the doctor said. We are giving him a little wash, that is all. You must spare us a moment or two for that. You swear he is all right. I swear it. Now lie back and relax. Close your eyes. Go on. Close your eyes. That's right. That's better. Good girl. I have prayed and prayed that he will live, Doctor. Of course he will live. What are you talking about? The others didn't. What? None of my other ones lived, Doctor. The doctor stood beside the bed looking down at the pale, exhausted face of the young woman. He had never seen her before today. She and her husband were new people in town. The innkeeper's wife, who had come up to assist in the delivery, had told him that the husband worked at the local customs house on the border and that the two of them had arrived quite suddenly at the inn, with one trunk and one suitcase about 3 months ago. The husband was a drunkard, the innkeeper's wife had said, an arrogant, overbearing, bullying little drunkard, but the young woman was gentle and religious. And she was very sad. She never smiled. And the few weeks that she had been here, the innkeeper's wife had never once seen her smile. Also, there was a rumor that this was the husband's third marriage, that one wife had died and that the other had divorced him for unsavory reasons, but that was only a rumor. The doctor bent down and pulled the sheet up a little higher over the patient's chest. You have nothing to worry about, he said gently. This is a perfectly normal baby. 3? This is my fourth in 4 years. The doctor shifted his feet uneasily on the bare floor. I don't think you know what it means, Doctor, to lose them all 3 of them, slowly, separately, one by one. I keep seeing them. I can see Gustave's face now as clearly as if he were lying here beside me in the bed. Gustave was a lovely boy, Doctor, but he was always ill. It is terrible when they are always ill, and there is nothing you can do to help them. I know. The woman opened her eyes, stared up at the doctor for a few seconds, and closed them again. My little girl was called Ida. She died a few days before Christmas. That is only 4 months ago. I just wish you could have seen Ida, Doctor. You have a new one now. But Ida was so beautiful. Yes, the doctor said. I know. How can you know? She cried. I am sure that she was a lovely child, but this new one is also like that. The doctor turned away from the bed and walked over to the window and stood there looking out. It was a wet, gray April afternoon, and across the street he could see the red roofs of the houses and the huge raindrops splashing on the roofs and the tiles. Ida was 2 years old, Doctor, and she was so beautiful. I was never able to take my eyes off her from the time I dressed her in the morning until she was safe in bed again at night. I used to live in holy terror of something happening to that child. Gustave had gone, and my little Otto had also gone, and she was all I had left. Sometimes I used to get up in the night and creep over to the cradle and put my ear close to her mouth, just to make sure that she was breathing. Try to rest, the doctor said, going back to the bed. Please, try to rest. The woman's face was white and bloodless, and there was a slight bluish-gray tinge around the nostrils and the mouth. A few strands of damp hair hung down over her forehead, sticking to the skin. When she died, I was already pregnant again when that happened, Doctor. This new one was a good 4 months on its way when Ida died. I don't want it, I shouted after the funeral. I won't have it. I have buried enough children, and my husband." He was strolling among the guests with a big glass of beer in his hand. He turned around quickly and said, "I have news for you, Clara. I have good news." Can you imagine that, Doctor? We have just buried our third child, and he stands there with a glass of beer in his hand and tells me that he has good news. "Today I've been posted to Brownell," he says, "so you can start packing at once. This will be a new start for you, Clara," he says. "It will be a new place, and you can have a new doctor." Please, don't talk anymore. You are the new doctor, aren't you, Doctor? That's right. And here we are in Brownell? Yes. I'm frightened, Doctor. Try not to be frightened. What chance can the fourth one have now? You must stop thinking like that. I can't help it. I am certain there is something inherited that causes my children to die in this way. There must be. That is nonsense. Do you know what my husband said to me when Otto was born, Doctor? He came into the room and he looked into the cradle where Otto was lying, and he said, "Why do all my children have to be so small and weak?" I am sure he didn't say that. He put his head right into Otto's cradle as though he were examining a tiny insect, and he said, "All I am saying is, why can't they be better specimens? That's all I am saying." And 3 days after that, Otto was dead. We baptized him quickly on the 3rd, and he died the same evening. And then Gustav died, and then Ida died. All of them died, Doctor, and suddenly the whole house was empty. Don't think about it now. Is this one so very small? He is a normal child. But small? He's a little small, perhaps, but the small ones are often a lot tougher than the big ones. Just imagine. Frau Hitler, this time next year, he will be almost learning how to walk. Isn't that a lovely thought? He didn't answer this. And 2 years from now, he will probably be talking his head off and driving you crazy with his chatter. Have you settled on a name for him yet? A name? Yes. I don't know. I'm not sure. I think my husband said that if it was a boy, we were going to call him Adolphus. Oh my gosh. Here is the little beauty. That means he would be called Adolf. Yes, my husband likes Adolf because it has a certain similarity to Alois. My husband is called Alois. Excellent. Oh no, she cried, starting up suddenly from the pillow. That's the same question they asked me when Otto was born. It means he is going to die. You are going to baptize him at once. Now, the doctor said, taking her gently by the shoulders. You are quite wrong. I promise you, you are wrong. I was simply being an inquisitive old man, that is all. I love talking about names. I think Adolphus is a particularly fine name. It is one of my favorites. And look, here he comes now. The innkeeper's wife, carrying the baby high up on her enormous bosom, came sailing across the room towards the bed. Here's the little beauty, she cried, beaming. Would you like to hold him, my dear? Shall I put him beside you? Is he well wrapped? The doctor asked. It is extremely cold in here. Certainly, he is well wrapped. The baby was tightly swaddled in a white woolen shawl, and only the tiny pink head protruded. The innkeeper's wife placed him gently on the bed beside the mother. There you are, she said. Now you can lie there and look at him to your heart's content. I think you will like him, the doctor said, smiling. He is a fine little baby. He has the most lovely hands, the innkeeper's wife exclaimed. Such long, delicate fingers. The mother didn't move. She didn't even turn her head to look. Go on, cried the innkeeper's wife. He won't bite you. I am frightened to look. I don't dare to believe that I have another baby and that he is all right. Don't be so stupid. Slowly, the mother turned her head and looked at the small, incredibly serene face that lay on the pillow beside her. "Is this my baby?" "Of course. Oh, but he's beautiful." The doctor turned away and went over to the table and began putting his things into his bag. The mother lay on the bed gazing at the child and smiling and touching him and making little noises of pleasure. "Hello, Adolphus," she whispered. "Hello, my little Adolph." "Shh," said the innkeeper's wife. "Listen, I think your husband is coming." The doctor walked over to the door and opened it and looked out into the corridor. "Herr Hitler?" "Yes." "Come in, please." A small man in a dark green uniform stepped softly into the room and looked around him. "Congratulations," the doctor said. "You have a son." The man had a pair of enormous whiskers, meticulously groomed after the manner of the Emperor Franz Joseph, and he smelled strongly of beer. "A son?" "Yes." "How is he?" "He is fine. So is your wife." "Good." The father turned and walked with a curious little prancing stride over to the bed, where his wife was lying. "Well, Clara," he said, smiling through his whiskers, "how did it go?" He bent down to take a look at the baby. Then he bent lower in a series of quick, jerky movements. He bent lower and lower until his face was only about 12 inches from the baby's head. The wife lay sideways on the pillow, staring up at him with a kind of supplicating look. "He has the most marvelous pair of lungs," the innkeeper's wife announced. "You should have heard him screaming just after he came into the world." "But my God, Clara." "What is it, dear?" "This one is even smaller than Otto was." The doctor took a couple quick paces forward. "There is nothing wrong with that child," he said. Slowly, the husband straightened up and turned away from the bed and looked at the doctor. He seemed bewildered and stricken. "It's no good lying, doctor," he said. "I know what it means. It's going to be the small all over again." "Now you listen to me," the doctor said. "Do you know what happened to the others, doctor?" "You must forget about the others, Herr Hitler. Give this one a chance. But so small and weak, my dear sir. He has only just been born." "Even so, what are you trying to do?" cried the innkeeper's wife. "Talk him into his grave?" "That's enough," the doctor said sharply. The mother was weeping now. Great sobs were shaking her body. The doctor walked over to the husband and put a hand on his shoulder. "Be good to her," he whispered. "Please, it is very important." Then he squeezed the husband's shoulder hard and began pushing him forward, surreptitiously to the edge of the bed. The husband hesitated. The doctor squeezed harder, signaling him urgently through fingers and thumb. At last, reluctantly, the husband bent down and kissed his wife lightly on the cheek. "All right, Clara," he said. "Now stop crying." "I have prayed so hard that he will live, Alois." "Yes. Every day for months I have gone to church and begged on my knees that this one will be allowed to live." "Yes, Clara, I know. 3 dead children is all that I can stand. Don't you realize that?" "Of course." "He must live, Alois. He must, he must. Oh God, be merciful upon him now." Do you think that this was the story of Hitler's birth? I don't know. The Squaw by Bram Stoker. Nuremberg at the time was not so much exploited as it has been since then. Irving had not been playing Faust, and the very name of the old town was hardly known to the great bulk of the traveling public. My wife and I, being in the 2nd week of our honeymoon, naturally wanted someone else to join our party so that when the cheery stranger Elias P. Hutchison, hailing from Ethsmian City, Bleeding Gulch, Maple Tree County, Nebraska, turned up at a station at Frankfurt and casually remarked that he was going on to see the most all-fired old Methuselah of a town in Europe, and that he guessed that so much traveling alone was enough to send an intelligent, active citizen into the melancholy ward of a daft house. We took the pretty bored hint and suggested that we should join forces. We found on comparing notes afterwards that we had each intended to speak with some diffidence or hesitation so as not to appear too eager, such not being a good compliment to the success of our married life, but the effect was entirely marred by our both beginning to speak at the same instant, stopping simultaneously and then going on together again. Anyhow, no matter how, it was done, and Elias P. Hutchison became one of our party. Straight away, Amelia and I found the pleasant benefit. Instead of quarreling as we had been doing, we found that the restraining influence of a third party was such that we now took every opportunity of spooning in odd corners. Amelia declares that ever since she has, as the result of that experience, advised all her friends to take a friend on honeymoon. Well, we did Nuremberg together and much enjoyed the racy remarks of our transatlantic friend who, from his quaint speech and his wonderful stock of adventures, might have stepped out of a novel. Looks like I might need to turn this down just a little bit. All right. The berg is seated on a rock dominating the town, and an immensely deep coast guard it on the northern side. Nuremberg has been happy in that it was never sacked. Had it been, it would certainly not be so spick and span perfect as it is at present. The ditch has not been used for centuries, and now its base is spread with tea gardens and orchards, of which some of the trees are of quite respectable growth. As we wandered round the wall, dawdling in the hot July sunshine, we often paused to admire the views spread before us, and in especial the great plain covered with towns and villages and bounded with a blue line of hills, like a landscape of Claude Lorraine. From this we always turned with new delight to the city itself, with its myriad of quaint old gables and acre-wide red roofs dotted with dormer windows, here standing grim the torture tower, which was and is perhaps the most interesting place in the city. For centuries, the tradition of the Iron Virgin of Nuremberg has been handed down as an instance of the horrors of cruelty of which man is capable. We had long looked forward to seeing it, and here, at last, was its home. In one of our pauses, we leaned over the wall in the moat and looked down. The garden seemed quite 50 or 60 feet below us, and the sun poured into it with an intense, moveless heat like that of an oven. Beyond rose the gray, grim wall, seemingly of endless height, and losing itself right and left in the angles of bastion and counterscarp. Trees and bushes crowned the wall, and above again towered the lofty houses on whose massive beauty time has only set the hand of approval. The sun was hot and we were lazy. A pretty sight, a great black cat lying stretched in the sun, while round her gambolled prettily a tiny black kitten. The mother would wave her tail for the kitten to play with, or would raise her feet and push away the little one as an encouragement to further play. They were just at the foot of the wall, and Elias P. Hutchison, in order to help the play, stooped and took from the walk a moderate-sized pebble. "See," he said, "I will drop it near the kitten, and they will both wonder where it came from." "Oh, be careful," said my wife. "You might hit the dear little thing." "Not me, ma'am," said Elias P. "Why, I'm as tender as a Maine cherry tree. Lord bless ye, I wouldn't hurt the poor, pooty little critter more'n I'd scalp a baby, and you may bet your variegated socks on that. See, I'll drop the fairway on the outside so it's not to go near it." Thus saying, he leaned over and held his arm out a full length and dropped the stone. It may be that there is some attractive force which draws lesser matters to greater, or more probably the wall was not plump but sloped to its base, so we not noticing the inclination from above, but the stone fell with a sickening thud that came up to us through the hot air, right on the kitten's head, and shattered out its little brains then there. The black cat cast a swift upward glance, and we saw her eyes like green fire fixed an instant on Elias P. Hutchison. And then her attention was given to the kitten, which lay still with just a quiver of her tiny limbs, while a thin red stream trickled from the gaping wound. With a muffled cry such as a human being might give, she bent over the kitten, licking its wounds and moaning. Suddenly she seemed to realize that it was dead and again threw her eyes up at us. I shall never forget the sight, for she looked the perfect incarnation of hate. Her green eyes blazed with lurid fire, and the white, sharp teeth seemed to almost shine through the blood which dabbled her mouth and whiskers. She gnashed her teeth, and her claws stood out stark and at length on every paw. Then she made a wild rush up the wall as if to reach us, but when the momentum ended, fell back and further added to her horrible appearance, for she fell on the kitten and rose with her black fur smeared with its brains and blood. Amelia turned quite faint, and I had to lift her back from the wall. There was a seat close by in the shade of a spreading plane tree, and here I placed her while she composed herself. Then I went back to Hutchison, who stood without moving, looking down on the angry cat below. As I joined him, he said, "Wall, I guess that air the savagest beast I ever see, 'cept once when an Apache squaw had an edge on a half-breed what they nicknamed Splinters, 'cause of the way he fixed up her papoose, which he stole on a raid just to show that he appreciated the way that they had given his mother the fire torture.' She got the kinder look so set on her face that it just seemed to grow there. She followed Splinters more'n 3 years, till at least Braves got him and handed him over to her. They did say that no man, white or Injun, had ever been so long a-dying under the tortures of the Apaches. The only time I ever see her smile was when I wiped her out. I came on the camp just in time to see Splinters passing his chits, and he wasn't sorry to go either. He was a hard citizen, and though I never could shake him after that papoose business, where it was bitter bad, and he should have been a white man, for he looked like one, I see. He had got paid out in full, darn me, but I took a piece of his hide from one of his skinning posts and had it made into a pocketbook. It's here now," and he slapped the breast pocket of his coat. While he was speaking, the cat was continuing her frantic efforts to get up the wall. She would take a run back and then charge up, sometimes reaching an incredible height. She did not seem to mind the heavy fall which she got each time, but started the renewed vigor, and at every tumble her appearance became more horrible. Hudson was a kind-hearted man, my persons, and he seemed concerned at the state of fury to which the cat had brought itself. "Wall, now," he said, "I do declare that poor critter seems quite desperate. There, poor thing. It was all an accident, though. We'll bring back your little one till you say. I wouldn't have had such a thing happen for 1,000. Just shows what a clumsy fool of a man can do when he tries to play. Seems too darn slipper-handed to even play with a cat. Say, Colonel. It was a pleasant way he had to bestow titles freely. Hope your wife don't hold no grudge against me on account of this unpleasantness. Why, I wouldn't have it occur on no account. He came over to Amelia and apologized profusely, and she, with her usual kindness of heart, hastened to assure him that she quite understood that it was an accident. Then we all went again to the wall and looked over. The cat missing Hutchison's face had drawn back across the moat and was sitting on her haunches as though ready to spring. Indeed, the very instant she saw him, she did spring, and with a blind, unreasoning fury which would have been grotesque, only that it was so frightfully real. She did not try to run up the wall, but simply launched herself at him as though hate and fury could lend her wings to pass straight through the great distance between them. Amelia, womanlike, got quite concerned and said to Elias P. in a warming voice, "Oh, you must be very careful. That animal would try to kill you if she were here. Her eyes look like positive murder." He laughed jovially. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said, "but I can't help laughing. Fancy man that has fought grizzlies and Injuns being careful of being murdered by a cat." When the cat heard him laugh, her whole demeanor seemed to change. She no longer tried to jump or run up the wall, but went quietly over and, sitting again beside the dead kitten, began to lick and fondle it as though it were alive. "See," I said. "The effect of a really strong man. Even that animal in the midst of her fury recognizes the voice of a master and bows to him." "Like a squaw," was the only comment of Elias P. Hutchison. As we moved on our way round the city fosse, every now and then we looked over the wall and each time saw the cat following us. At first she had kept going back to the dead kitten, and then, as the distance grew greater, took it in her mouth and so followed. After a while, however, she abandoned this, for we saw her following all alone. She had evidently hidden the body somewhere. Amelia's alarm grew at the cat's persistence, and more than once she repeated her warning. But the American always laughed with amusement, till finally, seeing that she was beginning to be worried, he said, "I say, ma'am, you needn't be scared over that cat. I go heeled, I do." Here he slapped his pistol pocket at the back of his lumbar region. "Why, sooner'n have you worried, I'll shoot the critter right here, and risk the police interfering with a citizen of the United States for carrying arms contrary to regulations." As he spoke, he looked over the wall, but the cat, on seeing him, retreated with a growl into a bed of tall flowers and was hidden. He went on, "Blessed if that ar critter ain't got more sense of what's good for her than most Christians. I guess we've seen the last of her. You bet she'll be back now, and for that busted kitten have a private funeral of it all to herself." Amelia did not like to say more, lest he might, in mistaken kindness to her, fulfill his threat of shooting the cat. And so he went on and crossed the little wooden bridge leading to the gateway, whence ran the steep paved roadway between the burg and the pentagonal torch tower. As we crossed the bridge, we saw the cat again down below us. When she saw us, her fury seemed to return, and she made frantic efforts to get up the steep wall. Hutchison laughed as he looked down at her and said, "Goodbye, old girl. Sorry I injured your feelings, but you'll get over it in time. So long." And then we passed through the long, dim archway and came to the gate of the burg. When we came out again after our survey of this most beautiful old place, which not even the well-intentioned efforts of the Gothic restorers of 40 years ago have been able to spoil, though their restoration was then glaring white, we seemed to have quite forgotten the unpleasant episode of the morning. The old lime tree, with its great trunk gnarled with the passing of nearly 9 centuries, the deep well cut through the heart of the rock by those captives of old, and the lovely view from the city wall whence we heard, spread over almost a full quarter of an hour, the multitudinous chimes of the city, had all helped to wipe out from our minds the incident of the slain kitten. We were the only visitors who had entered the torture tower that morning, so at least said the old custodian, and as we had the place all to ourselves, were able to make a minute and more satisfactory survey than would have otherwise been possible. The custodian looked to us as the sole source of his grain for the day was willing to meet our wishes in any way. The torture tower is truly a grim place, even now when many thousands of visitors have sent a stream of life, and the joy that follows life, into the place, but at the time I mention it wore its grimmest and most gruesome aspect. The dust of ages seemed to have settled on it, and the darkness and the horror of its memories seemed to have become sentient in a way that would have satisfied the pantheistic souls of Philo or Spinoza. The lower chamber where we entered was seemingly in its normal state, filled with incarnate darkness. Even the hot sunlight streaming in through the door seemed to be lost in the vast thickness of the walls, and only showed the masonry rough as when the builder's scaffolding had come down, but coated with dust and marked here and there with patches of dark stain which, if walls could speak, could have given their own dread memories of fear and pain. We were glad to pass up the dusty wooden staircase, the custodian leaving the outer door open to light us somewhat on our way, for to our eyes the one long wicked evil-smelling candle stuck in a sconce on the wall gave an inadequate light. When we came up through the open trap in the corner of the chamber overhead, Amelia held on to me so tightly that I could actually feel her heartbeat. I must say, for my own part, that I was not surprised at her fear, for this room was even more gruesome than that below. Here there was certainly more light, but only just sufficient to realize the horrible surroundings of the place. The builders of the tower had evidently intended that only they who would gain the top should have any of the joys of light and prospect. There, as we had noticed from below, were ranges of windows, albeit of medieval smallness, but elsewhere in the tower were only a very few narrow slits which, as were habitual in places of medieval defense. A few of these only lit the chamber, and these so high up in the wall that from no part could the sky be seen through the thickness of the walls. In racks and leaning in disorder against the walls were a number of headsmen's swords, great double-handed weapons with broad blade and keen edge. Hard by were several blocks whereon the necks of the victims had lain, with here and there deep notches where the steel had bitten through the guard of flesh and shored into the wood. Round the chamber, placed in all sorts of irregular ways, were many implements of torture which made one's heart ache to see. Chairs full of spikes which gave instant and excruciating pain. Chairs and couches with dull knobs whose torture was seemingly less, but which, though slower, were equally efficacious. Racks, belts, boots, gloves, collars, all made for compressing at will. Still baskets in which the head could be slowly crushed into a pulp if necessary. Watchmen's hooks with long handle and knife that cut at resistance. This a specialty of the old Nuremberg police system, and many other devices for man's injury to man. Amelia grew quite pale with the horror of the things, but fortunately did not faint. For being a little overcome, she sat down on a torture chair, but jumped up again with a shriek. All tendency to faint gone. We both pretended that it was just the injury done to her dress by the dust of the chair and the rusty spikes which had upset her, and Mr. Hutcheson acquiesced in accepting the explanation with a kind-hearted laugh. But the central object in the whole of this chamber of horrors was the engine known as the Iron Virgin, which stood near the center of the room. It was a rudely shaped figure of a woman, something of the Bell order, or, to make a closer comparison, of the figure of Mrs. Noah in the children's art, but without the slimness of waist and perfect roundure of hip which marks the aesthetic type of Noah family. One would hardly have recognized it as intended for a human figure at all had not the founder shaped on the forehead a rude semblance of a woman's face. This machine was coated with rust without and covered with dust. A rope was fastened to a ring in the front of the figure, about where the waist should have been, and was drawn through a pulley fastened on the wooden pillar which sustained the flooring above. The custodian pulling this rope showed that a section of the front was hinged like a door at one side. We then saw that the engine was of considerable thickness, leaving just room enough inside for a man to be placed. The door was of equal thickness and of great weight, for it took the custodian all his strength, aided though he was by the contrivance of the pulley, to open it. This weight was partly due to the fact that the door was of manifest purpose hung so as to throw its weight downwards, so that it might shut of its own accord when the strain was released. The inside of the honeycombed with rust, nay more, the rust alone that comes through time would hardly have eaten so deep into the iron walls. The rust of the cruel stains was deep indeed. It was only, however, when we came to look at the inside of the door that the diabolical intention was manifest to the full. Here were several long spikes, square and massive, broad at the base and sharp at the points, placed in such a position that when the door should close, the upper ones would pierce the eyes of the victim, and the lower ones his heart and vitals. The sight was too much for poor Amelia, and this time she fainted dead off, and I had to carry her down the stairs and place her on a bench outside till she recovered. That she felt it to the quick was afterwards shown by the fact that my eldest son bears to this day a rude birthmark on his breast, which has, by family consent, been accepted as representing the Nuremberg Virgin. When we got back to the chamber, we found Hutcheson still opposite the Iron Virgin. He had been evidently philosophizing, and now gave us the benefit of his thought in the shape of a sort of exordium. "Well, I guess I've been learning something here while Madame has been getting over her faint. 'Pears to me that we're a long way behind the times on our side of the big drink. We asked her think out in the plains of the engine could give us points in trying to make a man uncomfortable, but I guess your old medieval law and order party could raise him every time. Splinters was pretty good in his bluff on the squaw, but this here young miss held a straight flush all high on him. Points of them spikes are sharp enough still, though even the edges are eaten out by what us'ter be on them. It'd be a good thing for our Indian section to get some specimens of this here play toy and send around to the reservation just to knock the stuffing out of the bucks and the squaws too, by showing them as how old civilization lays over them at their best. Yes, but I'll get in that box a minute just to see how it feels." "Oh, no, no," said Amelia. "It's too terrible." "I guess, ma'am, nothing's too terrible to the exploring mind. I've been in some queer places in my time. Spent a night inside a dead horse while a prairie fire swept over me in Montana territory, and another time slept inside a dead buffler. when the Comanches was on the warpath and I didn't care to be leaving my Cunard in them. I've been 2 days in the caved-in tunnel in the Billy Bronco gold mine in New Mexico and was one of the 4 shut up for 3 days of a day in the casing what slid over on her side when we was setting the foundations of the Buffalo Bridge. I've been funked and not experienced yet, and I don't propose to begin now. We saw that he was set on the experiment, so I said, "Well, hurry up, old man, and get through it quick." "All right, General," said he. "But I calculate we ain't quite ready yet. The gentlemen, my predecessors, what stood in that there canister, didn't volunteer for the office, not much, and I guess there was some ornamental tying up before the big stroke was made. I want to go into this thing fair and square, so I must get fixed up proper first. I dare say this old galoot can rise some string and tie me up according to sample." This was said interrogatively to the old custodian, but the latter, who understood the drift of his speech, though perhaps not approaching to the full and niceties of the dialect and imagery, shook his head. His protest was, however, only formal and made to be overcome. The American thrust a gold piece into his hand, saying, "Take it, pard. It's your pot, and don't be scared. This ain't no necktie party that you're asking to assist in." He produced some thin frayed rope and proceeded to bind our companion with sufficient strictness for the purpose. When the upper part of his body was bound, Hutchison said, "Hold on a moment, Judge. Guess I'm too heavy for you to tote into the canister. You just let me walk in, and then you can wash up regarding my legs." While speaking, he had backed himself into the opening, which was just enough to hold him. It was a close fit, and no mistake. Amelia looked on with fear in her eyes, but she evidently did not like to say anything. Then the custodian completed his task by tying the American's feet together so that he was now absolutely helpless and fixed in his voluntary position. He seemed to really enjoy it, and the incipient smile which was habitual to his face blossomed into actuality as he said, "Guess this here Eve was made out of the rib of a dwarf. There ain't much room for a full-grown citizen of the United States to hustle. We has to make our coffins more roomier in Idaho territory. Now, Judge, you've just began to let this door down. Slow on to me. I want to feel the same pleasure as the other jays, and when those spikes began to move toward their eyes." "Oh, no, no, no," broke in Amelia hysterically. "It's too terrible. I can't bear to see it. I can't. But the American was obdurate. "Say, Colonel," said he, "why not take Madame for a little promenade? I wouldn't hurt her feelings for the world. But now that I'm here having come 8,000 miles, wouldn't it be too hard to give up the very experience I've been pinning or panting for? A man can't get the fill like canned goods every time. Me and the judge here'll fix up this thing in no time, and then you'll come back and we'll all laugh together." Once more the resolution that is born of curiosity triumphed, and Amelia stayed holding tight to my arm and shivering while the custodian began to slacken slowly, inch by inch, the rope that held back the iron door. Hutchison's face was positively radiant as his eyes followed the first movement of the spikes. "Whoa!" he said. "I guess I've not had enjoyment like this since I left New York. Bar scrap with a French sailor at Wapping, and that weren't much of a picnic either. I've not had a show for real pleasure in this dod-rotted continent, where there ain't no bars, nor no engines, and where nary man goes healed. Slow there, Judge. Don't you rush this business. I want a show for my money. This game I do." The custodian must have had him in some of the blood of his predecessors in that ghastly tower, for he worked the engine with a deliberate and excruciating slowness which, after 5 minutes, in which the outer edge of the door had not moved half as many inches, began to overcome Amelia. I saw her lips whiten and felt her hold upon my arm relaxed. I looked around in instant for a place whereon to lay her, and when I looked at her again, found that her eye had become fixed on the side of the Virgin. Following its direction, I saw the black cat crouching out of sight. Her green eyes shone like danger lamps in the gloom of the place, and their color was heightened by the blood which still smeared her coat and reddened her mouth. And I cried out, "The cat! Look out for the cat!" For even then she sprung out before the engine. At this moment she looked like a triumphant demon. Her eyes blazed with ferocity, her hair bristled out till she seemed twice her normal size, and her tail lashed about as does a tiger's when the quarry is before it. Elias P. Hutcheson, when he saw her, was amused, and his eyes positively sparkled with fun as he said, "Darned if the squaw hain't got on all her war paint. Just give her a shove off as she comes in any of her tricks on me, for I'm so fixed everlastingly by the boss that darn my skin if I can keep my eyes from her if she wants 'em. Easy there, Judge. Don't you slack that ar rope or I'll..." Sure. At this moment, Amelia completed her feint and had to clutch hold of her round the waist, or she would have fallen to the floor. While attending to her, I saw the black cat crouching for a spring and jumped up to turn the creature out. But at that instant, with a sort of hellish scream, she hurled herself, not as we expected at Hutcheson, but straight at the face of the custodian. Her claws seemed to be tearing wildly as one sees in the Chinese drawings of the dragon rampant, and as I looked, I saw one of them light on the poor man's eye, and actually tear through it and down his cheek, leaving a wide band of red where the blood seemed to spurt from every vein. With a yell of sheer terror, which came thicker than even his sense of pain, the man leaped back, dropping as he did so the rope which held back the iron door. I jumped for it, but was too late, for the cord ran like lightning through the pulley block, and the heavy mass fell forward from its own weight. As the door closed, I caught a glimpse of our poor companion's face. He seemed frozen with terror. His eyes stared with a horrible anguish, as if dazed, and no sound came from his lips. And then the spikes did their work. Happily, the end was quick, for when I wrenched open the door, they had pierced so deep that they had locked in the bones of the skull through which they had crushed, and actually tore him, out of his iron prison till, bound as he was, he fell at full length with a sickly thud upon the floor, the face turning upward as he fell. I rushed to my wife, lifted her up, and carried her out, for I feared for her very reason if she would wake from her faint to such a scene. I laid her on the bench outside and ran back. Leaning against the wooden column was the custodian, moaning in pain, while he held his reddening handkerchief to his eyes. And sitting on the head of the poor American was the cat, purring loudly as she licked the blood, which trickled through the gashed socket of his eyes. I think no one will call me cruel because I seized one of the old executioner's swords and shore her in two as she sat. Here There Be Tygers by Stephen King. Charles needed to go to the bathroom very badly. There was no longer any use in trying to fool himself that he could wait for recess. His bladder was screaming at him, and Miss Bird had caught him squirming. There were 3 third-grade teachers in Acorn Street Grammar School. Miss Kinney was young and blonde and bouncy and had a boyfriend who picked her up after school in a blue Camaro. Mrs. Trask was shaped like a Moorish pillow and did her hair in braids and laughed boomingly. And there was Miss Bird. Charles had known he would end up with Miss Bird. He had known that. It had been inevitable because Miss Bird obviously wanted to destroy him. She did not allow children to go to the basement. The basement, Miss Bird said, was where the boilers were kept, and well-groomed ladies and gentlemen would never go down there, because basements were nasty, sooty old things. Young ladies and gentlemen do not go to the basement, she said. They go to the bathroom. Charles squirmed again. Miss Bird cocked an eye at him. Charles, she said clearly, still pointing her pointer at Bolivia. Do you need to go to the bathroom? Kathy Scott in the seat ahead of him giggled, wisely covering her mouth. Kenny Griffin sniggered and kicked Charles under his desk. Charles went bright red. Speak up, Charles, Miss Bird said brightly. Do you need to? Urinate. She'll say urinate. She always does. Yes, Miss Bird. Yes, what? Yes, I have to go to the bathroom. Miss Bird smiled. Very well, Charles. You may go to the bathroom and urinate. Is that what you need to do? Urinate? Charles hung his head, convicted. Very well, Charles. You may do so, and next time kindly don't wait to be asked. General giggles. Miss Bird rapped a board with her pointer. Charles trudged up the road towards the door, 30 pairs of eyes boring into his back, and every one of those kids, including Kathy Scott, knew that he was going into the bathroom to urinate. The door was at least a football field's length away. Miss Bird did not go on with the lesson, but kept her silence until he opened the door, entered the blessedly empty hall, and shut the door again. He walked down towards the boys' bathroom. Basement, 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 if I want. Dragging his fingers along the cool tile of the wall, letting them bounce over the thumbtack stippled bulletin board and slide lightly across the red, break glass in case of emergency fire alarm box. Miss Bird liked it. Miss Bird liked making him have a red face. In front of Kathy Scott, who never needed to go to the basement. Was that fair? And everybody else? Old B-I-T-C-H, he thought. He spelled because he had decided last year God didn't say it was a sin if you spelled. He went into the boys' bathroom. It was very cool inside, with a faint, not unpleasant smell of chlorine hanging pungently in the air. Now, in the middle of morning, it was clean and deserted, peaceful and quite pleasant. Not at all like the smoky, dinky cubicle of the Star Theater downtown. The bathroom, basement, was built like an L. The short side lined with tiny square mirrors and white porcelain wash bowls and a paper towel dispenser. Nibrock. Alongside with 2 urinals and 3 toilet cubicles. Charles went around the corner after glancing morosely at this thin, rather pallid face in one of the mirrors. Tiger was lying down at the far end, just underneath the pebbly white window. It was a large tiger with yawny Venetian blinds and dark stripes laid across its pelt. It looked up alertly at Charles, and its green eyes narrowed. A kind of silky, purring grunt issued from its mouth. Smooth muscles flexed, and the tiger got to its feet. Its tail twitched, making little chinking sounds against the porcelain side of the last urinal. The tiger looked quite hungry and very vicious. Charles hurried back the way he had come. The door seemed to take forever to wheeze pneumatically close behind him, but when it did, he considered himself safe. This door only swung in, and he could not remember ever reading or hearing that tigers were smart enough to open doors. Charles wiped the back of his hand across his nose. His heart was thumping so hard he could hear it. He still needed to go to the basement worse than ever. He squirmed, winced, and pressed a hand against his belly. He really had to go to the basement. If he could only be sure no one would come, he could use the girls. It was right across the hall. Charles looked at it longingly, knowing he would never dare, not in a million years. What if Kathy Scott should come? Or black horror. What if Miss Bird should come? Perhaps he had imagined the tiger. He opened the door wide enough for one eye and peeked in. The tiger was peeking back from around the angle of the L, its eye a sparkling green. Charles fancied he could see a tiny blue fleck in that deep brilliance, as if the tiger's eye had eaten one of its own, as if a hand slid around his neck. Charles gave a stifled cry and felt his heart and stomach cram up into his throat. For one terrible moment he thought he was going to wet himself. It was Kenny Griffin, smiling complacently. Miss Bird sent me after you 'cause you've been gone 6 years. You're in trouble. Yeah, but I can't go to the basement, Charles said, feeling faint with the fright Kenny had given him. You're constipated, Kenny chortled gleefully. What'll I tell Kathy? You better not, Charles said urgently. Besides, I'm not. There's a tiger in there. What's he doing? Kenny asked. Taking a piss? I don't know, Charles said, turning his face to the wall. I just wish he'd go away. He began to weep. Hey, Kenny said, bewildered and a little frightened. Hey, what if I have to go? What if I can't help it? Miss Bird'll say, come on, Kenny said, grabbing his arm in one hand and pushing the door open with the other. You're making it up. They were inside before Charles, terrified, could break free and cower back against the door. Tiger, Kenny said, disgustedly. Boy, Miss Bird's gonna kill you. It's round the other side. Kenny began to walk past the wash bowls. Kitty, 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 kitty. Don't, Charles hissed. Kenny disappeared around the corner. Kitty, 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 kitty. Charles darted out the door again and pressed himself against the wall, waiting, his hands over his mouth and his eyes squinched shut, waiting for the scream. There was no scream. He had no idea how long he stood there frozen, his bladder bursting. He looked at the door of the boys' basement. It told him nothing. It was just a door. He wouldn't. He couldn't. But at last he went in. The wash bowls and the mirrors were neat, and the faint smell of chlorine was unchanged, but there seemed to be a smell under it. A faint, unpleasant smell like freshly sheared copper. You know what that means, right, boys and girls? I'm pretty sure that's blood. With groaning but silent trepidation, he went to the corner of the L and peeped around. The tiger was sprawled on the floor, licking its large paws with a long, pink tongue. It looked incuriously at Charles. There was a torn piece of shirt caught in one set of its claws. But his need was a white agony now, and he couldn't help it. He had to. Charles tiptoed back to the white porcelain basin closet, closest to the door. Miss Bird slammed in just as he was zipping his pants. Why, you dirty, filthy little boy, she said almost reflectively. Charles was keeping a weather eye on the corner. I'm sorry, Miss Bird. Tiger. I'm going to clean the sink. I'll use soap. I swear I will. Where's Kenneth? Miss Bird asked calmly. I don't know. He didn't really. Is he back there? No, Charles cried. Miss Bird stalked to the place where the room bent. Come here, Kenneth. Right this moment. Miss Bird. Miss Bird was already around the corner. She meant to pounce. Charles thought Miss Bird was about to find out what pouncing was really about. He went out the door again. He got a drink at the drinking fountain. He looked at the American flag hanging over the entrance of the gym. He looked at the bulletin board. Woodsy Owl said, Give a hoot, don't pollute. Officer Friendly said, Never ride with strangers. Charles read everything twice. Then he went back to the classroom, walked down his row to his seat with his eyes on the floor, and slid into his seat. It was 11:45. He took out Roads to Everywhere and began to read about Bill at the rodeo. Men Overboard by Winston Churchill. It was a little after 9:30 when the men fell overboard. The mail steamer was hurrying through the Red Sea in the hope of making up the time which the currents of the Indian Ocean had stolen. The night was clear, though the moon was hidden behind clouds. The warm air was laden with moisture. The still surface of the waters was only broken by the movement of the great ship, from whose quarter the long, slanting undulations struck out, like the feathers from an arrow shaft, and in whose wake the froth of air bubbles churned up by the propeller trailed in a narrowing wife to the darkness of the horizon. There was a concert on board. All the passengers were glad to break the monotony of the voyage, and gathered around the piano in the companion house. The decks were deserted. The man had been listening to the music and joining in the songs, but the room was hot, and he came out to smoke a cigarette and enjoy a breath of the wind which the speedy passage of the liner created. It was the only wind in the Red Sea that night. The accommodation ladder had not been unshipped since leaving Aden, and the man walked out on the platform as onto a balcony. He leaned his back against the rail and blew a puff of smoke into the air reflectively. The piano struck up a lively turn, and a voice began to sing the first verse of The Rowdy Dowdy Boys. The measured pulsations of the crew were a subdued but additional accompaniment. The men knew the song. It had been the rage at all the music halls when he had started for India 7 years before. It reminded him of the brilliant and busy streets he had not seen for so long, but was soon to see again. He was just going to join in the chorus when the railing, which had been insecurely fastened, gave way suddenly with a snap, and he fell backwards into the warm water of the sea amid a great splash. For a great moment he was physically too much astonished to think. Then he realized that he must shout. He began to do this even before he rose to the surface. He achieved a hoarse, inarticulate, half-choked scream. A startled brain suggested the word "help," and he bawled this out, lustily and with frantic effort 6 or 7 times without stopping. Then he listened. Hi! Hi! Clear the way! We're the Rowdy Dowdy Boys! The chorus floated back to him across the smooth water, for the ship had already passed completely by. And as he heard the music, a long stab of terror drove through his heart. The possibility that he would not be picked up dawned for the first time on his consciousness. The chorus started again. Then, I say, boys, who's for a jolly spree? Rum, hum, tiddly, who'll have a drink with me? Help! 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 Shrieked the man in desperate fear. Fond of a glass now and then, fond of a row or noise. Aye, aye, clear the way for the Rowdy Dowdy Boys. The last words drawled out faint and fainter. The vessel was steaming fast. The beginning of the second verse was confused and broken by the ever-growing distance. Dark outline was the great hull was getting blurred. The stern light dwindled. Then he set out to swim after it with furious energy, causing every dozen strokes to shout long, wild shouts. The disturbed waters of the sea began to settle again to their rest. The widening undulations became ripples. The aerated confusion of the screw fizzed itself upwards and out. The noise and the sounds of life and music died away. The liner was but a single faded light in the blackness of the waters and a dark shadow against a polar sky. At length, full realization came to the man, and he stopped swimming. He was alone, abandoned. With the understanding, his brain reeled. He began again to swim, only now instead of shouting, he prayed, made incoherent prayers, the words stumbling into one another. Suddenly, a distant light seemed to flicker and brighten. A surge of joy and hope rushed through his mind. They were going to stop, turn the ship and come back. And with the hope came gratitude. His prayer was answered. Broken words of thanksgiving rose to his lips. He stopped and stared after the light, his soul in his eyes. As he watched it, it grew gradually but steadily smaller. Then the man knew that his fate was certain. Despair succeeded hope. Gratitude gave place to curses. Beating the water with his arms, he raved impotently. Foul oaths burst from him, as broken as his prayers, and as unheeded. The fit of passion passed, hurried by increasing fatigue. He became silent, silent as was the sea, where even the ripples were subsiding into the glassy smoothness of the surface. He swam on mechanically along the track of the ship, sobbing quietly to himself. In the misery of fear, and the stern light became a tiny speck, yellower, but scarcely bigger than some of the stars which here and there shone between the clouds. Nearly 20 minutes passed, and the man's fatigue began to change to exhaustion. The overpowering sense of the inevitable pressed upon him. With a weariness came a strange comfort. He need not swim all the long way to Suez. There was another course. He would die. He would resign his existence, since he was thus abandoned. He threw up his hands impulsively and sank. Down, down he went through the warm water. The physical death took hold of him, and he began to drown. The pain of that savage grip recalled his anger. He fought with it furiously. Striking out with arms and legs, he sought to get back to the air. It was a hard struggle, but he escaped victorious and gasping to the surface. Despair awaited him. Feebly splashing with his hands, he moaned in bitter misery. I can't. I must. Oh God, let me die. The moon, then in her third quarter, pushed out from behind the concealed clouds and shed a pale, soft glitter upon the sea. Upright in the water 50 yards away was a black, triangular object. It was a fin. It approached him slowly. His last appeal had been heard. Well, isn't that grim? The next story is The Lottery, but we're not going to be reading that until next time we have story time. I would say next weekend, but you never know. I might have time to do it during the week, but let's not count our chickens before they hatch. Speaking of chickens, this last week, I believe it was Monday, they said they were shipping my chicks and my 2 little goslings. So I got 3 Cornish cross hens, and then I got 3 brown egg laying hens. There's really not a name for them. That's just what they call them through Metzer Farms. And then I got a white. Well, it's not white yet. It's just a really cute puffy yellow. But yeah, an Emdum goose to go with Grace. Grace Shelley now has a boyfriend named Prince Rainier. And then Miss Greta Van Geet, or Beat. I believe I named her Greta Van Beat. But I call them geeks because they're so cute and geeky. But anyways, she's my buff goose, and I got her a boyfriend too, and his name is Freddie. I will be posting a picture of Mr. Freddie as I was cuddling him to my chest, and he just had to be in the crook of my neck. So I allowed him to cuddle with me in the crook of my neck and asked my youngest daughter to take a picture, and they are the cutest pictures ever. I'm going to have to upload them to Facebook under We Are Paradox Media so you guys can see him. He is so cute and tiny. Emden Goose has a orange beak, and my buff goose has a brown beak, so that's the easy way that you can tell them apart. But they are so frickin' cute. I gotta say, they are the cutest. Yeah, I'm hoping that Greta and Grace are going to be happy with this. Greta's been curiously hanging out on the porch because she, I think, has been hearing the babies in there geeking. Of course, the little baby chicks are chipping. One of my Cornish crosses didn't make it, so I made a report on that, so I might get a refund for that little chick, but I'm so excited for spring. I just bought some potting soil. I'm going to be planting some milkweed. I have, I believe, 4 different versions that I'm going to be planting, and milkweed is basically the only food for monarch butterflies on their long trip. So I will give the address for you guys so you can get your own. But unfortunately, we are at the end of our time this evening. Thank you so much once again for hanging out with me tonight. It was a pleasure hanging out with you and hopefully entertaining you. Thank you to all my friends out there, wherever you may be listening Beyond the Omniverse tonight. Had a wonderful time and can't wait to do it again this next weekend. Maybe sooner, but let's just shoot for next weekend. Don't forget, my friends, we are all in this together. Together we can make the world a little bit better, and together we are Paradox Media, because without you, there is no us. If you have the means, ability, or initiative, if you believe in what I'm doing here or just enjoy hanging out with me on the airwaves, please sling or fling some green my way. It would really help me keep this mothership afloat. Places that you can donate are by mail at P.O. Box 663, Bayfield, Colorado 81122. Cash App at $TessaTNT, PayPal at TessaTNT, and Venmo at Tessa-Thomas-Peterson. If you have a scary story, or any story you'd like to share, or you just need a friend to reach out to, send it to me at weareparadoxmedia@gmail.com, and I will get back to you. Night night, love and night. Take care of my ears. I'll see you back here, same crazy time, same crazy place. Sweet dreams.